Story 1. The Permit Holder. It called me Bug. Nobody had called me that since my brother died. He'd been gone 10 years, and the voice was coming from somewhere behind my tree stand, maybe 12 feet back, low to the ground in the deadfall. I had an arrow knocked, and my hand on the rest, and I could not look down. I could not let the head turn. The wind was wrong, and the light was going, and the voice said it again, soft, the way Cole used to say it when we were kids, and he was trying not to wake our parents. I had drawn a Colorado elk tag for Unit 76 in the second archery season, and I had been planning the trip for 19 months. Solo backcountry. 5 days. The Weminuche Wilderness, south of the Vallecito drainage, up toward Flint Lakes, country I'd hunted with my brother twice before he died, and never since. I'd made my peace with going back. I told myself I'd been in therapy off and on for 8 years, and the woman I saw said going back was healthy, and I believed her, and I bought new boots for the trip and broke them in on the trail behind my apartment for 2 months. The drive from Denver to Bayfield is 6 hours, if you don't stop. I stopped twice, once for coffee in Salida, and once at a turnout west of Wolf Creek where I could see the whole San Juan Range stacked up white in the morning light. I got to the Vallecito trailhead a little before noon, on a Saturday in late October. The parking lot had 4 trucks in it. One of them belonged to a man named Walt Henson, who ran a small outfit out of Bayfield, packing hunters in and out of the wilderness with mules. I'd hired him to drop my camp at a meadow about 9 miles up, and to pull me out the following Wednesday morning. He met me at the trailhead with 2 saddle mules and 1 pack horse, and we shook hands, and he asked me how my brother was doing. He passed, I said. 10 years now. Walt looked at the ground and then at me. I'm sorry. I thought of him this morning. I don't know why. I didn't have an answer for that. I gave him my pack and my bow case, and we rode in. The trail up Vallecito Creek climbed slow for the first 4 miles, gaining maybe 800 feet through pine and aspen, and crossing the creek twice on bridges the Forest Service rebuilt after the High Park burn. Walt rode point on a sorrel mule named Junior, who'd worked that trail for 16 seasons. I rode behind him on a red mule he didn't have a name for. The pack horse, a paint with a blanket of scars across his chest from an old wire incident, brought up the rear with my dry bag and tent and food. We didn't talk for the first hour. Walt was the kind of man who treated silence as the default condition and conversation as something you used when you needed it. I appreciated that. After we crossed the second bridge, he reined Junior back and rode beside me where the trail widened. You sleep up here last time? He asked. Up at Flint, the lower lake, 2014. With your brother. Yeah, he nodded. We rode a while. I had a man last fall, he said. Lost his wife in a car accident and decided he was going to scatter her up at Rock Lake. Hired me to pack him in. Halfway up, he started talking to her. I let him. We got up there, he scattered her, came back down crying, paid me the rest, drove home. Some people, the country gives them what they need, some people it doesn't. I don't know which one's which till after. Which one was he? He was all right. Called me the next month. Took up gardening. Walt shifted in his saddle. Country didn't take from him. He gave it something on his terms. I watched his back for a few minutes. The mule under me smelled like sweat and pine sap. I said, what about the other ones? He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, you know how to put a tent up in the rain in the dark? Yes, that's the answer to your question. We rode in. My partner that week, technically, was a guy named Trevor Acosta. We'd been hunting together for 6 seasons. Trevor had drawn a tag for the unit just east of mine, and he'd packed in 2 days earlier with a different outfitter. We weren't camped together. We had a radio schedule, though. 2 channels on a pair of handhelds, check-ins at 6 a.m., noon, and 8 p.m., and an emergency channel we left on receive at all times. Trevor's camp was about 4 miles east of mine across a ridge. We'd worked it out so neither of us was alone in the woods without somebody knowing we were still alive. The first 2 days were good. I want to say that because of what came after, it would be easy to pretend the whole trip was wrong from the start. It wasn't. The first morning, I glassed a herd of 7 cows and a small bull from a finger ridge above my camp and watched them feed across the meadow in the gold hour, and I cried a little, because the last time I'd been on that ridge I had been 24 years old, and Cole had been 27, and he'd been alive, and now I wasn't and he wasn't. Trevor radioed in at noon and said he'd seen a 6x6 a half mile from his camp and was going to try to set up on a wallow that evening. I told him I had cows and a small bull. He said cows count. I said, yeah, they do. That first night I cooked a dehydrated chili over my stove and ate it sitting on a downed log outside my tent. The temperature dropped fast after sundown. I could see my breath by the time I'd finished eating. I washed the pot in a small spring near my camp and hung my food in the bear bag I'd set the previous afternoon, and crawled into my bag and lay there listening for a long time. The wilderness in October at night is not silent. It's full of small sounds, the kind that don't have names. A pine cone falling, a snowshoe hare in the willows, the wind passing through the top of a fir, and the same wind not reaching the bottom of it. I'd forgotten how full it was. I lay there and listened, and at some point I fell asleep without remembering when. The second day I hiked north along a drainage looking for bigger sign. I found it near a beaver pond about 2 miles from camp. A bull had cut a tree at chest height with his antlers, peeling the bark in long strips, and there were tracks in the wet ground near the water that were as wide across as my open hand. I sat the wallow that afternoon and didn't see anything, but I felt good. I radioed Trevor at 8, and he said he'd had a bull respond to his cow call, but it wouldn't come in. We agreed to keep at our spots in the morning. The second night, I journaled for an hour by headlamp in the tent. I'd brought a small write-in-the-rain notebook for the trip. I wrote down the wallow location, the tracks, the wind direction, what time the cows had crossed the meadow. I wrote down that I missed Cole, although I'd known I would miss him, and I wrote down a thing he'd said once about elk hunting, which was that you couldn't hunt them well if you were thinking about anything else, and I wrote down that I was trying. I closed the notebook and put it in the dry bag and slept. The third day was when it started. I was up at 4. Headlamp on red, water on the stove, oatmeal. I was in my tree stand by 5:30, in the dark, on the edge of a small park about 3/4 of a mile from camp. The stand was set in a Douglas fir at about 18 feet, looking down into a saddle that crossed from the beaver pond drainage over to a south-facing slope where I'd seen elk feed at dawn the day before. The temperature was about 20 degrees. There was frost on every flat surface that wasn't fir needles, including the rungs of my climbing sticks. I was wearing a base layer, a mid-weight fleece, a windproof shell, wool pants, and the new boots, which were finally broken in. I had my bow on a hanger to my left and my release on my belt, and a small set of binoculars around my neck. The first cue I noticed wasn't a scary thing, it was a track. When the light came up enough to see, around 6:15, I glassed the saddle. I picked up a single elk track in the frost on a game trail about 40 yards from my stand. I had looked at that exact section of trail the night before. There hadn't been a track there. I told myself an elk had walked through in the dark. That was the whole point of being in the stand in the dark. I felt a small lift, the kind a hunter knows, and I started watching. 20 minutes later I saw it again. The same single track, this time in a different place, about 60 yards to my right, on a different game trail. One track. Not a line of them. One. I checked it with the binoculars for a long time. The frost was undisturbed everywhere except that single hoofprint. No tracks leading in, no tracks leading out. Just one track, in the middle of unmarked ground. I told myself the wind had blown the frost off the rest of the line, or that the elk had stepped exactly on bare ground all the way in and out except for that one step. I knew that wasn't possible. I told myself it was, and I sat there. At 7:15 I radioed Trevor on the noon channel, even though it wasn't noon. He didn't pick up. That was normal. He was probably set up on his bull. I left it. At 7:30 I saw the flagging. There was a pine tree at the south edge of the saddle that I had marked the day before on my way back to camp with a strip of pink flagging tape at about waist height. I had marked it because the trail forked there and I hadn't wanted to lose the spur on the way home in the dark. The pink tape was still on the tree. There was now a second strip of tape, orange, tied at eye level on the same tree. I had not put it there. I did not own orange flagging tape. I sat in the stand and watched the orange flagging move in the wind for a long time, and I tried to think of a reason for it that wasn't the reason I was thinking of. A trail crew, maybe, except this wasn't a maintained trail. Another hunter, except I was the only permit holder for this section. I knew that, I'd checked. The flagging moved in the wind. I told myself I'd take it down on the way out and be careful where I stepped on the way back to camp. About a half hour after that, I noticed the base of my own tree. I had not glassed straight down at the base of my Douglas fir since climbing up before dawn. There hadn't been a reason to. Now, with the sun up enough to throw real light into the saddle, I looked over the edge of the platform and I saw on the ground at the foot of the tree, where I'd stood to clip into my climbing sticks, a single white pine cone. It was placed in the exact center of my boot print from earlier that morning. I could see the print clearly in the frost. The cone was sitting in the heel of it, upright, balanced on its stem. I had not put it there. I had walked into the stand from the south. The cone had not been there when I climbed up. It was there now. There was no other sign on the ground. No tracks leading to the cone, no tracks leading away. I sat in the stand and I tried to think clearly. A squirrel had dropped it. A squirrel had been working in the canopy and had dropped a cone, and it had landed in my boot print by chance, and the chance was small but not impossible. I told myself that. I told myself it the way I had told myself about the single track and about the orange flagging. I did not believe any of it. At 7:50, a bull bugled. It came from the south-facing slope, a long, high scream that fell off into a series of grunts at the end. It was the right sound. It was a real bull. I sat up in the stand and got my release on the string and waited. There was a pause of maybe 40 seconds. Then it bugled again, closer, maybe 200 yards. The grunts at the end went into a cough. I am going to try to describe the cough. It was a human cough. It was the cough of a man clearing his throat to speak. It was wet. It came from a person's chest. It was tucked under the elk grunt so neatly that I almost missed it, the way a single human syllable will sometimes appear in static, except this wasn't static. This was a bull elk on a frosty morning 200 yards, out in the timber, and the last note in his vocalization was a man clearing his throat to speak. The bugle didn't come again. I sat in the stand. I did not move. I had been hunting for 16 years, and I knew what a bull elk sounded like, and I knew what a man sounded like, and I knew that no animal makes that sound. I knew it. Trevor radioed in at 8 on the dot. I picked up. "You hear that bugle?" he said. "Yeah," I said. I heard it. Sounded weird at the end. I closed my eyes. I had not imagined it. "Where'd it come from?" I said. "My west. South slope. About a half mile from me, I'd say." There was a pause. "You want to hike over?" "No," I said. "Stay where you are. I'm going to sit a bit longer." "You good?" "I'm good. Keep the radio on." "Always." I clicked off and put the radio in the pocket of my shell. I left it on receive and turned the volume down to the lowest setting I could still hear. I did not turn it off. That decision is the only reason any of this is documented. For the next 90 minutes, nothing happened. The frost burned off in the lower part of the saddle. A flock of mountain chickadees worked through the firs near my stand. I watched the orange flagging on the pine tree. The wind shifted twice. Once, around 9, I thought I heard footsteps moving along a downed log about 30 yards behind my stand, but when I twisted to look, I saw nothing. The footsteps stopped when I looked. Then they started again. Not when I looked away, when I started to look away. I held still. The footsteps continued for about 15 seconds. They were unhurried. They had the cadence of a man walking a familiar trail. They moved from my left to my right, behind me, and then they stopped. I did not turn around. The voice came about a minute later. "Bug." It was directly behind my tree stand, 12 feet back, maybe, low and close to the ground, the way a man's voice carries when he is crouched in deadfall. It was Cole's voice. I want to be honest about this. People will say a thing like that, and they will mean it sounded like someone the way a stranger sounds like someone you knew. It wasn't that. It was Cole's voice. It had the rasp he got after he'd been talking too long. It had the small lift on the second consonant that he always had, the way some people pronounce a word and you'd know them from 100 feet of dark hallway. It was his voice. I am going to stop trying to explain that. He'd called me Bug since I was 4. The full nickname was Lightning Bug. I'd been afraid of thunder when I was small, and I used to crawl into his bed during storms, and he'd said one night, after a particularly bad one, that I should be the lightning, not afraid of it. And he'd called me Bug the next morning, and never stopped. Our parents didn't know, our cousins didn't know, our friends didn't know. He was the only person in my entire life who had used that name, and he had been dead since the spring of 2015, when he'd fallen 60 feet off a granite face on a route in the Wind Rivers in front of 2 of his climbing partners, and I had identified his body in a county morgue in Lander, Wyoming, 6 days before my 25th birthday. Bug, the voice said again, come down here. I want to show you something. I did not turn around. I did not move. I tried to slow my breathing. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips on the bow grip. The voice circled. It moved from directly behind my stand, around to my right, slow, taking maybe 2 minutes to cover what should have been 40 yards in 20 seconds. There were no footsteps now. There was just the voice, moving. Hey, it said from my right. It was about 10 feet off the ground. Hey, you remember Eagle Lake? I had not thought about Eagle Lake in years. Cole had taken me there in the summer of 1996, when I was 6 and he was 9, on a fishing trip with our father. We'd caught a single brook trout on a black woolly bugger that I'd tied wrong, and Cole had told me it counted because I was the one who'd cast it in. I had not told that story to anyone. Not to my therapist, not to Trevor, not to anyone. It was a thing that had only happened in the heads of 3 people, and 2 of them were dead. You tied it wrong, the voice said, but it counted. I sat in the stand. I did not move my head. I watched the orange flagging. The radio in my shell pocket clicked. I had not pressed the button. I had left it on receive. You there? Trevor's voice, low. Did you key your mic? I had not. Something had keyed it from outside the radio. I did not understand how that was possible. The voice from the trees said, Trevor. It used Trevor's name. It said it again, Trevor. I had not, at any point in any of our radio conversations, said Trevor's name on the air. I never used names on the radio. He had never used mine. We used call signs we'd worked out years ago, 2 letters each, his and mine. The thing in the trees should not have known his name. The radio clicked again. Trevor's voice. Urgent now. What was that? The voice from the trees laughed. It was Cole's laugh. I am not going to keep flagging that. From here on, when I say the voice, I mean the voice that was using Cole's mouth, or the memory of it, or whatever the thing in the trees had built out of the things it had taken. I keyed my mic. I did it slow. I held the radio close to my mouth and I said, very quietly, Trev, stay where you are. There's something here. I'll be back at camp by dark. Don't move. There was a long pause on the other end. Then he said, copy, I'm staying. Channel open. I clicked off receive only. He clicked the same. He'd left his mic open on the emergency channel, which meant that anything he heard, dispatch would also hear if anyone was monitoring, and anything I said he would hear. The thing in the trees said, Bug, come down. Mom's worried about you. Our mother had died of pancreatic cancer in 2019. I sat in the stand. The thing tried different approaches over the next hour. It used Cole's voice through most of it. It used my mother's voice once. It used my father's voice once, although my father was alive and at home in Boulder and the voice was slightly off, the way a voice will be when someone is doing an impression of a man they have heard but not known. I noticed that. I held on to it. The Cole voice was perfect. The mom voice was perfect. The father voice was not. That meant the thing had only what was inside me. It had what I had carried for a long time. It did not have what I had not let myself feel. I did not move. The light started to fall around 5. I had been in the stand for almost 12 hours. My legs were dead. My hands had been cold for so long I couldn't feel my release. The thing in the trees had gone quiet for the last 40 minutes. I did not believe it was gone. I made a decision. The trail back to my camp ran south along the saddle, then dropped through a stand of aspen into the drainage where the beaver pond sat, and from there it was about a half-mile of open creek bottom back to my tent. There was another way. The drainage itself, the creek, ran through a small canyon below the beaver pond. You could walk it if the water was low. It was loud. It was wet. It was not the trail. I had been told something once by a man who had grown up on the Jicarilla Reservation in northern New Mexico and who'd worked for a few years as a guide for an outfit out of Pagosa. He'd been packing my brother and me out of the South San Juans the summer I was 22. He'd told me, around a fire on the second night, that if you ever heard a voice in the timber that knew you better than it should, you didn't walk the trail back. You walked water. He had not explained more. He'd looked at me a long time and said, "Walk water," and then he'd put another log on the fire. I had not thought about that conversation in a long time. I keyed my mic. "Trev, here. I'm coming down. I'm not taking the trail back. I'm walking the creek out from below the beaver pond. I'll be slow. Keep the channel open. Copy. You good?" "No." "Copy. I'm here." I climbed down from the stand. I did it as quietly as I could. My bow was in my left hand. The arrow was still nocked. I had a second arrow in a quiver on the stand, and I did not stop to retrieve it. I walked east, away from the trail, away from the orange flagging, into the timber and down toward the drainage. The voice followed. It paced me on my right, about 30 yards off, moving through the trees. I never saw it. I want to make that clear. I never once saw a body. I heard it move, and I heard it speak, and I felt it the way you feel a person standing too close in a dark room, but I did not see it. It said my name. It said Bug. It said Cole's name in Cole's voice, the way Cole had said his own name once when he was teaching me to spell it. It said, at one point, a phrase my mother had used to say at bedtime, and that one almost broke me, but I kept walking, and I did not answer. I got to the creek about 10 minutes before full dark. I stepped down off the bank into the water. The water was cold enough that I felt it through my boots inside of 3 seconds. It was about shin deep where I started. The creek ran south toward the beaver pond, and then below that into the small canyon, and I went south in the water, walking on the rocks where I could and in the channel where I had to. The voice stopped at the bank. "I am not going to embellish this. I want you to understand." The voice followed me through the timber for about 200 yards. When I stepped into the water, it stopped. It stayed on the bank. I kept walking, and the voice did not move. I could hear it behind me, on the bank, talking. It was talking to itself. It was saying my name. It was using Cole's voice. It said several times, "Come back up, Bug. Come back up here." I did not look back. I walked the creek. I walked the creek for about a mile and a half. Below the beaver pond, the water deepened in places, and I had to climb out and around and then back in. I did not walk the bank for more than 30 feet at a time. I kept getting back in the water. The voice was no longer audible after the first quarter mile. I could not tell whether it had given up or whether it had simply moved out of earshot. I assumed the second. It was full dark when I came out of the canyon. I was about a quarter mile from camp. I climbed out of the creek and walked the last bit through the open meadow to the tent. I was shaking from the cold and from the rest of it. I got the stove going. I radioed Trevor and told him I was at camp. He told me to talk to him until I fell asleep, and then to leave the radio on until morning. I did. I slept maybe 3 hours. I broke camp at first light and hiked the 9 miles out to the trailhead with my bow on my pack and my hand never far from the bear spray on my hip, which I knew would not have done a thing. Walt Henson was at the trailhead at noon. I had not radioed him to come early. He was there anyway, with the mules, sitting in his truck with the door open and a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked at me when I came down out of the timber, and he set the coffee on the dash and he got out. "You walked out," he said. I walked out. "You hear something up there?" I looked at him. He looked old to me. He had been old when I was 22, and he had been older still when Cole and I had hunted with him the year before Cole died, and he was older now. "Yeah," I said. "You walk water?" "Yeah." He nodded. He helped me load my pack into his truck. He did not ask me anything else. Trevor came out 3 days later, on his own schedule, with his bull. He'd killed it on the morning after my night. He'd stayed in the woods, and he'd hunted. I have asked him about it twice. He says he heard the thing on the radio, both times it spoke into the open mic, and that he couldn't sleep for the rest of the trip, but that he wasn't going to leave a kill in the field. I respect that. I don't know if I would have stayed. I filed a report with the San Juan National Forest District Office. I filed it because Walt suggested I should, and because I wanted whatever I had heard to be on a piece of paper somewhere in case anyone else came back from that drainage saying the same thing. The reference number on the report is SJNF-117-004. The district ranger, a woman in her 60s named Bonnie Halstead, took my statement in person at the Bayfield office. She did not laugh at me. She did not make notes that suggested she didn't believe me. She asked me about the orange flagging, and she wrote down its location. She asked me about the sound the bugle made at the end. She asked me about the creek. She closed her notebook, and she said, "Thank you for filing this." She did not say what the office would do with it. 2 weeks later, she called me. She said a trail crew had pulled the orange flagging the previous Tuesday, and that 2 other hunters had filed similar reports from the same drainage in the previous 5 years. She said she could not tell me their names. She said the office was not going to close the area, but that it had been added to a list of locations where they no longer assigned solo backcountry work. She thanked me again. She did not use the word Skinwalker. I did not either. She did say one other thing. She said that one of the 2 earlier reports had mentioned a voice using a family member's name, and that the hunter who had filed it had been from out of state, and that he had not come back. She said the second report had been filed by a Forest Service seasonal employee who had been doing trail maintenance work in the late summer of 2021. The seasonal had heard footsteps behind him on a section of the trail near the beaver pond, and a voice that he believed was his father, although his father had been dead for 3 years. The seasonal had walked the creek out. He had not given a reason for choosing the creek. He had written in the report that it had felt like the right thing to do. I asked Bonnie if the seasonal still worked for the Forest Service. She said no. I asked if he was alive. She said as far as she knew. She said he'd moved back to Wisconsin. She said she hoped he was doing well. I told her I hoped that too. I have not been back to the Weminuche. I am not going to go back. Trevor has been twice. He won't go alone. Story 2, Night Greater. Tyler's voice was coming through the cab radio asking if I'd grab him a coffee on my way back. Tyler was also standing in my headlights, 40 feet ahead of the blade, in his Department of Transportation high-vis vest, with his hard hat tipped back the way he always wore it. His mouth was not moving. The radio in my cab kept talking. The man in my headlights kept not moving. I sat behind the controls of a 40,000-pound motor grader at 4 in the morning on U.S. Route 191 in southeast Utah, and I tried to figure out which one of them was Tyler. I had worked for the Utah Department of Transportation for 22 years out of the Region 4 shed in Monticello. Most of those years I'd been a motor grader operator on the night crew, running blade work on the rural highways through San Juan County. The stretch of 191 between Monticello and Blanding is 21 miles of 2-lane blacktop running south through pinyon and juniper country, with maybe 6 houses and 1 gas station between the towns and nothing else. We graded it on a rotation in the late winter and early spring, after the freeze-thaw cycle started raising frost heaves in the shoulders, and we did most of the work between midnight and 6 a.m., when the highway was empty. The night I'm going to describe was a Thursday in the second week of March. I was running the grader, a Caterpillar 140M, brand new that year, with a heated cab and a radio that worked. Tyler Pulaski was running the chase truck, a UDOT Ford F-250 with the aero board on the back, and his job was to follow me about 2 miles back, set the cones, slow any traffic that came through, and run me coffee from the gas station in Blanding when we needed it. Tyler was 27 years old. He'd been on the crew for 3 seasons. His wife had given birth to twin girls in November, and he was working as much overtime as the union let him take. He showed me pictures of those girls on his phone every shift. I knew their names. The older one, by 4 minutes, was Cora. The younger one was Hattie. We started at midnight at the maintenance shed. I went south. Tyler went south behind me. The temperature was 16 degrees. There was no wind. The sky was clear enough that I could see the stars from the cab, although I kept my eyes on the road. The blade was set at 15 degrees, pulling material from the shoulder back across the lane, smoothing the heaves where the asphalt had buckled over the winter. I worked at 4 miles an hour. Tyler stayed back. We checked in on the radio every 20 minutes. The pre-shift at the Monticello yard had been the same as every pre-shift for 22 years. Renee Holiday called the briefing on the radio at 11:40. I walked the grader, checked the tire chains in the bay, topped off the diesel, walked the cab, ran the lights, the warning beacons, the strobe, the work lights, the radios. Tyler did the same with the chase truck. We met at the door of the shed and we walked out together, and Tyler showed me a video on his phone of Cora in the bathtub trying to put a washcloth on Hattie's head. Tyler thought this was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. I agreed it was funny. He climbed into his truck. I climbed up the steps to the grader cab. We rolled out at 5 after 12. I had gotten a coffee from a thermos at the shed. Tyler had not. He liked his coffee fresh, and he hated the break room thermos. He always made me run the gas station in Blanding around 3 or 4 to bring him back a cup. He drank it black with 2 sugars. I had the sugar packets in the glove box of my own truck back at the shed. I'd been bringing him coffee on these shifts for 2 seasons. The coffee request was not unusual. The coffee request was, in fact, exactly what Tyler would say on the radio to me at 4 in the morning on a Thursday, 12 miles south of Monticello. If Tyler were going to say something on the radio to me at 4 in the morning. For the first 3 hours, nothing was wrong. I want to say that, because what came after was so wrong that it would be easy to say the whole night had something off about it from the start. It didn't. I graded 12 miles of shoulder. I drank 2 cups of coffee from the thermos I kept in the cab. I listened to a country station out of Cortez, Colorado, that I could pick up on the FM, low, under the cab noise. Tyler radioed in to tell me a story about Cora throwing up on him at 3 the previous afternoon. I laughed. He said it wasn't funny. I said it was a little funny. He said, yeah, it was a little funny. The first thing that was wrong was a deer. I came around a slow bend about 7 miles south of Monticello, somewhere near a ranch turnoff I knew, and my headlights caught a mule deer doe lying off the shoulder on the west side. I didn't think anything of it for the first second. There are deer carcasses on that highway every week. They get hit. The DOT crews drag them off the road. Half the time they sit in the bar ditch until the coyotes get them. Then I looked again. The doe was lying on her side. Her front legs were folded under her chest, the way a deer folds them when she's bedding down for the night, not the way they fold when a vehicle hits her. Her back legs were extended. Her head was up, propped against a small juniper. Her eyes were open, dry, and dull, frosted over. She had been dead at least a day, maybe longer. She'd been arranged. There was no impact damage on her flank. There was no broken neck. There was no blood on the asphalt where you'd expect the strike to have happened. No skid marks, no glass. A doe hit at highway speed, lands hard. She bleeds from the mouth. Her bones break. This doe looked like she had been picked up off the side of the road somewhere and carried to that spot and put down in a position somebody had decided on. The juniper she was leaning against was not big enough to have caught her if she'd fallen. She was being held up. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I made a note of the location, and I told myself a hunter had probably set her up that way as a joke or a test, and I kept grading. I keyed the mic. Tyler, go. I just passed a doe carcass off the shoulder, west side, milepost 114 and change. Looks weird. Probably nothing. Note it for the morning crew. Copy. Weird how. Just weird. Keep going. Copy. I kept grading. The second thing was a vest. About 40 minutes later, I caught something orange in my passenger side mirror. Just a flicker. A shape moving along the edge of the road. Behind me, maybe 100 yards back. I leaned forward and looked. It was gone. I waited and watched the mirror for another half-mile and saw nothing. I keyed the mic. Tyler, where are you? 2 miles back. Why? You out of the truck? No. Why? I thought I saw a vest in my mirror. There was a pause. Could be a deer reflector. Some of them have orange tape now, or a sign reflecting your taillights. Yeah, probably. You good? I'm good. I kept grading. I watched the mirror for the next 10 minutes and saw nothing. I'd like to say that was the moment I knew. I didn't. I noted it. I filed it under the small list of weird things from the shift, and I kept working. The third thing was when I knew. About 15 minutes after the vest in the mirror, I heard a sound on the roof of the cab. Motor graders are loud. The diesel engine in the Caterpillar 140M throws off enough noise that you wear ear protection in some operations. Although, in the cab with the doors closed, it's tolerable. You can hear yourself think. You can hear the radio. You hear most outside sounds as muffled. You do not, as a rule, hear small things on the cab roof. I heard a small thing on the cab roof. It was a soft sound, like a hand being laid down on metal and then lifted. It happened once. Then it happened again, about a second later, and a few feet to the left of where the first sound had been. Then it stopped. I sat at the controls and I did not look up. The cab roof has no windows. I could not have seen what was on it without leaning out the side door. I did not lean out the side door. After about 30 seconds, I keyed the mic. Tyler, you there. Here. Anything weird at your end? No. Why? Just checking. You good? I'm good. I'd been grading for about another 20 minutes when my radio clicked. Tyler's voice came through. Hey, you see that? See what? Out my passenger window. Just now. Something on the shoulder. What was it? I don't know. Something tall. Stop the truck. I'm stopped. I'm pulling over now. I stopped the grader. I sat there with the engine running, the headlights pushing a long cone of light down a dark, empty highway, and I waited. After about 30 seconds, Tyler came back. Nothing. Whatever it was, it's gone. Probably a deer. You sure? Yeah. I'm rolling again. I rolled too. That was when I saw the figure ahead. It came into my headlights gradually, the way an object comes into view as you grade forward. At first I thought it was a road sign I hadn't seen before, although I knew there wasn't a sign there. Then I thought it was a man standing in the road, but a man in the road would have moved by now. The grader had been making noise for hours. He would have heard me. He would have stepped off the asphalt. I slowed. The figure didn't move. I came down to 2 miles an hour. The headlights caught the vest first. UDOT issue, high-vis orange, with the reflective stripes catching back at me. Then the hard hat. Then the face under the hard hat. It was Tyler. The hat was tipped back the way he wore his. He was facing me. He was standing dead center in the southbound lane, about 40 feet ahead of the blade. He had his hands in the pockets of his jacket. He was looking at the grader. The radio in the cab clicked. Hey, Tyler's voice said. You getting close to that turnaround at the gas station? I could go for a coffee. You want me to grab one for you? The man in the headlights did not move. His mouth did not open. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, and he watched the grader come. I sat in the cab. I keyed the mic. I did it slow. I tried to keep my voice level. Tyler, where are you right now? 2 miles back. Same as before. In the truck. In the truck. Open the door. Step out. There was a pause. Why? Just do it. Another pause. Then his voice came back, sharper. I'm out. What's wrong? The man in my headlights did not move. Tyler, look at the front of your truck. What do you see? My truck. Cones on the bed. Arrow board. The road. It's dark. I got my hazards going. There's nothing here. What's going on? I did not take my eyes off the figure. Stay on the radio. Stay where you are. Don't come up. Whatever you do, don't come up to me right now. Why? Are you hurt? I'm not hurt. Stay there. I keyed off. I kept the radio on receive. The figure in the headlights tilted his head. It was a small movement, the kind of head tilt a dog makes when it hears a sound it's curious about. His hands stayed in his jacket pockets. I dropped my hand to the cell phone in the cup holder. I had service on that stretch, barely. I dialed the dispatch number for the Region 4 overnight desk. The dispatcher that night was a woman named Renee Holliday. I'd known her for 15 years. She picked up on the second ring. Renee, it's me. I'm on 191, mile post about 109, southbound. I need you to get a trooper out here, right now. What's the situation? Her voice was already changing, going from the tired 4 a.m. dispatcher voice to the voice she used when somebody had been hit on a job site. I have a man in the road in front of my grader wearing a UDOT vest. He's not moving. Tyler is 2 miles south of me. I just talked to him on the radio. He's at his truck, I confirmed. Hold on. I heard her typing. The figure in my headlights took a step forward. It was not a normal step. He was 40 feet from me, and then he was about 30 feet from me, and I had not seen the leg move. I had seen him in one place, and then I had seen him in another. The transition between those two states had been a single flicker, the way a frame goes missing from a video. His hands were still in his pockets. Troopers 20 minutes out, Renee said. Where's the closest lit spot? The way station. I knew it without thinking. About 6 miles north of me, past Monticello, north side. Get there. Copy. I keyed the radio. Tyler, stay there. I'm backing up to you. Copy. What's happening? I'll tell you when I see you. Stay on the radio. Don't get back in the truck. Stand outside it with your eyes open. Copy. I put my hand on the headlight switch. I did something I wouldn't have done if I'd had time to think about it. I cut the headlights. The cab went black. The road went black. The dashboard glow of the grader was still there, the green wash of the gauges, and I could see my hands on the controls, and I could see the shape of the windshield in front of me, but everything outside the glass was dark. I waited 5 seconds. I switched the headlights back on. The figure was about 20 feet from the front of the blade. He had crossed 20 feet of asphalt in 5 seconds without making a sound. The grader's engine was running at idle. The cab was loud, but it wasn't that loud. I would have heard footsteps. I would have heard the rustle of a vest moving. I had heard nothing. He had also gotten taller. I want to be precise. I am not saying he had grown. I am saying the proportions of his body had changed, in the way they will change when you look at something twice, and the second time you realize it was always wrong, and you'd been mistaken about the first impression. His arms and the jacket sleeves were too long. The high-vis vest was riding up on his chest. The hard hat sat on his head at the wrong angle. The face under the hat was Tyler's face. It was Tyler's face the way a wax figure has a face. The eyes did not reflect. I keyed the radio. Tyler, tell me Cora's middle name. Long pause. Then his voice, confused. What? Cora's middle name. Right now. Ann. Cora Ann. Hattie's middle is May. Are you having a stroke? I closed my eyes for a second. The radio was Tyler. The thing in front of me was not. I raised the blade. I dropped the grader into reverse. I started backing up. I want to say something about the speed of a motor grader in reverse. They are not built to retreat. They are built to creep forward and finish a road. The top reverse speed of the Caterpillar 140M is something like 17 miles an hour, and you don't get to that speed from a dead stop fast. I crawled backward. I kept the headlights on the figure. I kept my eyes on him. He started walking after me. He walked at the speed of a man who is not in a hurry. He kept up with the grader without effort. His arms still hung at his sides with the hands in his pockets, and his legs moved the way human legs move, but his body had a wrongness to it now that I could not unsee. His shoulders were not square. His head was tilted. The high-vis vest looked like something that had been put on him by somebody else. The radio clicked. Tyler's voice. "Talk to me." "There's a man behind my grader," I said. "I'm backing up. I'm coming to you." "What man?" "Just stay outside the truck. Hazards on. Door open. Don't move." "Copy." I kept backing up. The thing kept walking. For about 90 seconds it was even. I made progress. He kept pace. The headlights stayed on him. He didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He looked straight at the cab. I looked straight at him, through the windshield, through the cab glass, and I tried to remember every detail of his face the way you tried to remember a license plate. Then I saw Tyler's truck in my mirror. The amber arrow board was lit up about a quarter-mile north. The hazards were flashing. Tyler was standing outside the driver's door. I could see his outline against the truck's interior lights. He had his radio in his hand. I keyed mine. "I see you. Stay there. Don't come up." "Copy." I kept backing. I had 2 miles to cover, and the grader was reverse crawling at maybe 10 miles an hour. That meant it was going to be a long couple of minutes. I watched the figure in my headlights, and I watched my mirror, and I saw, around the time I got within 100 yards of Tyler's truck, the figure stop. He stopped in the middle of the highway. He stood there. He did not move. I kept backing. I came up to the rear of Tyler's truck, and I stopped the grader about 30 feet north of him. I left the engine running. I climbed down from the cab and walked back to where Tyler was standing. He was holding the radio in his right hand and his maglite in his left. He was looking past me, south, down the road, toward the figure I'd left in my headlights. "What the hell am I looking at?" he said. I turned around. The figure was still in the headlights. He was still standing there. His hands were still in his pockets. The wind picked up enough to move the brim of his hard hat slightly. His face from this distance was just a pale shape under the brim. "That's not me," Tyler said. He said it small. "No, that's not me." "I know. What is it?" "I don't know." We stood there. I had the cell phone in my pocket, and I called Renee back. "I'm with Tyler," I said. "We're at his truck. The thing is about a quarter-mile south of us, in my headlights, in the middle of the road. It hasn't moved in maybe a minute. Trooper's 11 minutes out. Get to the way station." "We're going to the way station. Now." I hung up. I told Tyler we were leaving the grader. I told him we were going to drive his chase truck north, hazards on, no stops, until we hit the lights of the Monticello way station. He did not argue. He climbed in the driver's seat. I climbed in the passenger seat. He pulled a U-turn on the empty highway, and we drove north at 65 miles an hour with the hazards flashing, and we did not look in the mirrors. We did not look in the mirrors. I want to be clear about that. I had a feeling the whole way north that something was behind us. I don't know how to describe that feeling. It was the feeling of something being there. We did not look. Tyler had his hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel and his eyes straight ahead. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the road in front of us and did not turn my head. About a mile from town, the heater fan in the truck made a sound it shouldn't have made. A short rattle, then nothing. Tyler's eyes flicked to the dash and back to the road. "It's the fan," he said. "I know. It does that sometimes." "I know." We didn't say anything else until we were inside the lit zone of the way station. The way station outside Monticello has a row of sodium vapor lights on tall poles that throw a hard yellow light over a paved pull-off about 200 feet long. There is a small inspection building that's closed at night. The lights are on a timer, and they run from sundown to sunup. We pulled into the pull-off, and Tyler stopped the truck under the brightest of the lights, and we sat there with the engine running and the doors locked, and we looked at each other. I don't know how long we sat without talking, maybe 2 minutes. Tyler said, "I'm going to call my wife." "Don't." "Why not?" "Because if you do, you have to lie about why you're calling, and you're going to do it badly, and she's going to be awake the rest of the night. Wait till 7. Tell her at breakfast." He looked at me. His hand was on the phone in his pocket. He took it out anyway. He looked at the screen. He didn't unlock it. He put it back in his pocket. "Okay," he said. Then Tyler said, "Mirror." I looked. The figure was standing at the edge of the lid zone. I could see him at the south end of the pull-off, just past the line where the sodium vapor light fell off into the dark. He was on the asphalt. He was inside the boundary of the pull-off. He was not inside the light. He stood there. He didn't cross the line. Trooper Kemp arrived 9 minutes later. By the time his cruiser pulled in with the lights on, the figure was gone. I don't know when he left. I had taken my eyes off the mirror to look at Tyler, and when I looked back, the south end of the lit zone was empty. The trooper walked the length of the pull-off with his mag light and his sidearm, both hands on it, and he found nothing. No prints, no vest, no hard hat. The frost on the asphalt at the edge of the lit zone was undisturbed. He was a man in his 40s, maybe 45, who had been a state trooper in San Juan County for 14 years. He took our statements separately, me in the front seat of his cruiser, Tyler at the door of his truck, with the light still washing the pull-off in that hard yellow color. He was patient. He did not ask whether we had been drinking. He did not ask whether we had been smoking. He did not ask any of the questions a trooper might ask if he thought we were either lying or impaired. He asked me to describe the figure's clothing in detail. He asked me to describe the head tilt. He asked me to describe the moment I'd cut the headlights and turned them back on, and how far the figure had moved. He wrote it all down. When I finished, he said, "Anything else you want me to put in the report?" "No." He looked at me for a moment. He said, "I've been a trooper a long time. I've heard variations of this from people on this road. Not a lot, a few." "From who?" "Ranchers, truckers. A guy who used to drive a school bus down to Bluff. Once from a deputy. Always at night. Always on this stretch." "What do you tell them?" "I tell them what I am going to tell you. Don't drive this stretch alone at night if you don't have to. If you're going to, keep the radio on a frequency somebody else is listening to. Don't pull over for anybody you can't see clearly, and don't stop the vehicle for anything that doesn't belong to a person you can name out loud." He took our statements. He drove the 8 miles south to where we'd left the grader, and he checked it out. The grader was where we'd left it. The headlights were still on. The road in front of it was empty. He drove back. He told us to follow him to the shed and to not go back south of Monticello until daylight. We followed him. I worked another 7 years for the Department of Transportation after that night. I am retired now. Tyler still works for them. He took 2 months off after the incident, which the union covered, and he came back, and he is a good man and a good operator, and he has not been south of Monticello on the night shift since. He works the Moab section now. His daughters are 15 now. He still shows me pictures. The incident report number is U.R4-03-114. The Utah Highway Patrol case number is UHP-191-007. The reports do not say what the figure was. They say unidentified individual in restricted high-vis attire, possibly impersonating UDOT personnel. Possible explanation pending. They have been pending for 15 years. About 2 months after the incident, my supervisor at the time, a man named Joe Bredemeyer, who had been a UDOT operator for 34 years, brought me into his office. He closed the door. He pulled an old binder off a shelf, and he opened it. Inside was a typed memo dated 1987 on UDOT letterhead, signed by a regional supervisor who had retired in 1994. The memo said that all night shift operations on certain stretches of U.S. Route 191 in San Juan County would be conducted with 2 operators in the lead vehicle, never one until further notice. The memo did not give a reason. The "until further notice" had never been rescinded. The memo had been filed and forgotten, and the practice of single operator night shifts had resumed sometime in the late 90s when the men who remembered the reason for the rule retired. Joe gave me a copy of the memo. He told me to keep it. I am keeping it. The Region 4 shed in Monticello changed its overnight protocols inside of a month. We started running 2 operators in the lead vehicle on the 191 stretch, the way the old memo had said. The union backed it. Nobody asked too many questions. The official explanation, which went into the operator manual that summer, was operator safety in low population corridors with limited cell coverage. A few of the older men who had been in the shed in the late 70s and early 80s read the new section, looked at me. and didn't say anything. I asked Joe once, before he retired, whether he had ever seen anything on that road himself. He told me he had not, but that his father, who had operated for UDOT before him, had quit the night shift in 1972, and would not say why. His father had died in 1991, and he had taken the reason with him. I asked Tyler, much later, what he thought about the figure that night. He said he thought it had been him. He said it had been wearing his vest and standing the way he stood, and the face had been his face, and that he had not been afraid of it because he had been there before he understood what it was, but that for about a year afterward, when he saw himself in a mirror at night, he checked the eyes first. He said the eyes were the only part of the thing that hadn't been right. He said he was checking every time that his own eyes still reflected the way eyes are supposed to reflect. Story 3, Lambing Watch. I answered it the second time. I knew by then it wasn't my mother. She'd been dead almost 2 years, and the voice in the dark pasture was using a phrase she'd used when I was small, and I'd heard it the first time and I had not answered. And then I'd heard it a second time, and I had said one word back, and that's what brought the thing to the barn door. Pete tried to keep it out. He almost did. I don't know what would have happened if my father hadn't come down with the porch light at 4. I am writing this down because I owe it to him, and to the dog, and to the U in pen 4, and because if anybody else takes a barn shift alone in the middle of the night and hears their dead come calling out of the pasture, I want them to know it doesn't ask the way a person asks. It asks the way an animal sets a snare. I was 19. The ranch had been in our family since 1891. 3 generations of Jorgensens running sheep on a 4,700-acre lease north of Pinedale, Wyoming, in the foothills of the Wind Rivers. My great-grandfather had bought the original parcel from a homesteader who'd given up on it after 2 winters. My grandfather had built most of the barns and the house. My father had run the place since he was 30 and was running it still. I was the second of 2 children. My older sister had married a man from Cheyenne when she was 22 and had moved with him to Colorado Springs and was working as a paralegal there. I was the one left at home. My mother had died in March of 2022 of pancreatic cancer, 8 months after the diagnosis. She'd been 51. My father had taken 6 weeks off the operation, which he'd never done in his life, and then he had gone back to work, and he had not stopped working since. I'd been 17 when she died. I was 19 now. My mother was the first member of our family in 3 generations to have gone to college. She graduated with a teaching certificate from the University of Wyoming in 1992, and she taught 2nd grade at the elementary in Pinedale for 29 years, until the diagnosis. She had run her classroom the way she had run our kitchen, which is to say she had run it like a person who knew what she was doing and who was patient about explaining it to anyone who didn't. The day after she died, the school had let her students bring drawings to the funeral. There had been about 100 drawings. My father and I had not known what to do with them. They sat in a banker's box on the dining room table for 9 months. I had finally moved the box to the closet in her sewing room when I came home from college that first Christmas, because I could not stand to look at it anymore, and I could not throw it out, and my father had not been able to do either of those things himself. I was taking community college classes part-time at Western Wyoming in Rock Springs, 2 days a week on a route that meant a 6-hour round trip, and that I was trying to build into a real degree in agricultural science. The other days I worked the ranch. During lambing, which on our outfit ran from late February through early April, I worked nights so my father could sleep. He was 62. He had a heart valve thing the doctor in Pinedale wanted him to have addressed. He had not addressed it. He had told me in November that he could either sleep through lambing or pay for a hand, and he couldn't pay for a hand, and would I take the night shifts? I'd said yes. I would have said yes if he'd asked me to do anything. The shift ran midnight to 6. The lambing barn was about 120 yards south of the house, a long gambrel roof structure with 16 pens down each side and a wide concrete center aisle. It had been my grandfather's barn. The wood inside was the color of old smoke, and it smelled like lanolin and hay and ammonia and the particular damp warmth of animal bodies in winter. We had 340 bred ewes that year, mostly Rambouillet with a Targhee cross, and they were dropping at a rate of about 12 a day across the back end of the season. My job at night was to walk the pens every 30 minutes, watch for ewes going into labor, get them into a jug pen if they hadn't already, assist if there was a backwards lamb or a stuck shoulder, dock and band the new ones at first light, and call my father if anything went sideways. I had Pete with me on every shift. He was an old border collie, about 13, who had been my mother's dog and who was now nobody's dog in particular, although he slept on the rug at the foot of my bed. He had stopped working sheep 2 seasons earlier when his hips had gone bad. He still came to the barn at night because he couldn't stand to be left in the house when somebody he loved was outside. He had a cushion in the office that I had set up for him, and he slept there most of the shift and walked with me on the pen rounds. My mother had picked Pete out as a puppy in 2011 from a litter at a working ranch on the Green River south of Daniel. The breeder had told her Pete was the runt and probably wouldn't make a hand. My mother had said she would take the runt then. He had grown into a good hand. He had worked the operation for 10 years. He had once, when I was 12, run a coyote off a lamb in the south lot and come back with a torn ear that the vet had stitched. He was the kind of dog who looked at people with the slight reservation of an animal who had figured out early that humans were not as smart as he was, and who tolerated us anyway. My mother had loved him in a way she had not loved most things. He had slept on her side of the bed during the last weeks of her life. He had not eaten for 4 days after she died. The night I'm going to describe was the 17th of March in 2024. The temperature outside was in the low 20s. The wind had been a problem earlier in the week and had quit at sundown. There was no moon. We had 8 ewes in active jug pens, 3 of them with lambs from the last 24 hours, and 1 ewe in pen 4 who I'd been watching since 10 the previous evening, when my father had moved her from the main flock because her water had broken late in the afternoon and she hadn't started into real labor, and he was worried about her. I came on shift at 23:40. My father gave me a status on the 8 pens, told me to keep an eye on pen 4, kissed the top of Pete's head with the unself-conscious affection he'd never shown me, and walked back to the house. I watched the porch light go on and off as he opened the back door. The light went off about a minute later. I knew he wouldn't be in bed yet, but he would be soon. He had to be up at 6. I did my first round at midnight. The ewe in pen 4 was on her feet, restless but not pushing. I went to the office, put the kettle on the hot plate, took my notebook out of my jacket, and started writing the night log. That's when Pete went to the south door. The lambing barn has 2 doors. The big sliding double on the north end, where we move sheep in and out, and the smaller man door on the south end that opens onto the pasture and that I almost never use at night. Pete walked from his cushion, past the office, down the center aisle, and stopped about 10 feet from the south door. He stood there. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. His ears were forward, and his hackles were up. I called him. He didn't come. I called him again. He looked at me, then back at the door, then back at me. He did not move. I walked down the aisle. I put my hand on his back. The hair along his spine was standing straight up. I have had dogs my whole life. I have not, in 19 years, seen a dog do that exactly that way. He was not afraid the way a dog is afraid of a thunderstorm. He was alert the way a dog is alert when something is coming. I listened. The wind had stayed quit. The pasture beyond the south door was silent the way a pasture is silent at night, which is not silent at all, but a layered low hum of small things, except that even the small things were quiet now. I did not hear an owl. I did not hear coyotes. I did not hear the cattle in the lot to the east. There was no sound coming from outside the south door. I told Pete to stay. He did not move. I went back to the office, got my flashlight, and walked back. I cracked the south door open about 3 inches. The pasture beyond was black. The flashlight beam reached out and lit a circle of frozen ground about 30 feet across. Beyond the circle, nothing. I shone the light back and forth. I did not see anything that should not have been there. I did not see anything that should have been there either. No deer, no mice, no nothing. I closed the door. I latched it. Pete stayed in front of the door. The first time I heard the voice was at 12:47. I know it was 12:47 because I had just made my second round and I'd just written the time in the log. And I was sitting at the desk in the office reading a chapter for my Tuesday class. The voice came from outside. It came from the direction of the south door, from somewhere in the pasture, maybe 40 yards out. It said my name. It said, Bo. That's what my mother had called me. My given name is Robert, after my grandfather, but my mother had called me Bo from the day I was born because she'd had a brother named Bo who had died young, and she had said when I came out that I had his face. My father called me Robert, except sometimes when he was tired he called me Robbie. My sister called me Robbie always. The only person in my entire life who had ever used Bo for me was my mother, and my mother had been dead for 23 months. I sat at the desk. I did not move. It said it again. Bo. It was her voice. I have to be careful about how I say this. It was her voice, the way it was when I was small and she was calling me in for dinner, the lift on the vowel that she used when she was trying to be patient with me, the small upward turn on the second part of the syllable. It was the voice. I had not heard her voice in 23 months, and there it was, coming through the boards of the south door of my grandfather's barn, like she had been standing in the pasture the whole time and I had only just walked into earshot. I did not answer. Pete had moved. He was at the south door now, not 10 feet back, and his lip was up. He had stopped showing his teeth 2 seasons ago when his hips went. He was showing them now. The voice said, Bo, honey, where's your jacket? That had been a thing she'd said. She had said it 1,000 times. She'd said it on every morning of every elementary school year of my life, and on every cold afternoon when I'd come home from the school bus, and on the morning of the first day of 7th grade she'd said it as a kind of joke to my father, who had said back to her with the same intonation she'd used, Bo, honey, where's your jacket? And the two of them had laughed, and I had not known why, and I had been embarrassed, and she had ruffled my hair. I picked up the phone. I called the house line. It rang 3 times before my father picked up. What? Are you in the house? There was a pause. He said, I'm in the bedroom. Where else would I be? Are you alone? What's the matter? Are you alone in the house? Yes, I am alone in the house. Robert, what is going on out there? I could hear his breathing on the other end of the phone. He was alone. He was where he was supposed to be. He was not in the pasture. The voice in the pasture was not his. I said, I think there's somebody in the south pasture. I'm fine. Stay in the house. Should I come down? No. Stay in the house. Don't open the door. I'll call you back. You all right? I'm all right. Stay in the house. I hung up. I sat there. The voice came again from outside. Bo, where's your jacket? I should have said nothing. I knew by then that I should say nothing. I had known for a full minute. I had a dog at the south door with his teeth showing. I had a woman's voice in the pasture using a phrase I had not heard since 2022. I knew what was happening, and I had known it from the moment Pete walked to the door, although I had not let myself put it in words. I said, Mom. I said it because some part of me, the part that was 19 years old and that had not had a mother for 23 months and that thought about her every day and that had not gotten past anything, said it before the rest of me could stop it. I said it once, the whole word. I said, Mom. The voice in the pasture stopped. I heard footsteps. They came from the direction the voice had come from, slow, walking on frozen ground. They were not heavy footsteps. They were the footsteps of a person of no particular size, walking. They covered the 40 yards or so to the south door of the barn in maybe a minute. They stopped on the other side of the door. Pete went berserk. I have to use that word because there isn't a better one. He hit the south door with his shoulder. He hit it again. He was barking, the deep barking of a dog who has located a thing he intends to kill, and he was throwing himself at the wood of the door, and the door was holding, but it was rattling against the latch. Behind the door, the voice spoke again. "Bo, let me in. It's cold out here." It was still my mother's voice. Then, in the middle of the sentence, the voice flickered. It went, for one syllable, into my father's voice, then back to my mother's. Then, on the next breath, it was my sister's voice. My sister was in Colorado Springs. I had spoken to her on the phone 4 days earlier. The thing at the door was using her voice, the voice she had at 24, talking to me through the south door of the lambing barn at 1 in the morning. "Robbie, let me in." Pete was throwing himself at the door. I did not move from where I was standing in the center aisle. I had the flashlight in my left hand and the phone in my right. I was about 30 feet back from the door. I did not go closer. I did not speak again. I picked up the phone and called the house. My father picked up immediately. "Robert, stay in the house. Lock the doors. I am okay. I am in the barn. Pete is with me. Whatever you do, don't come down here." "What's going on?" "Stay in the house." "Robert, Dad, please." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I'm staying in the house. I'm putting the rifle by the door. You call me every 15 minutes. If you don't, I'm coming down." "Okay, every 15 minutes." "Okay." I hung up. I want to say one thing about the moment after I hung up the phone with my father, because I have thought about it more than any other moment of that night. I sat on the wooden floor of the office with the phone in my hand, and I tried to count how many breaths I'd taken since I'd said the word. 3, maybe 4. The word had been out of my mouth for less than 30 seconds. The footsteps had started inside of those 30 seconds. The thing in the pasture, whatever it was, had heard me say Mom from 40 yards out, in a wind that wasn't there, through the boards of a barn with a dog standing inside the south door, and had begun walking toward the source of the sound the instant I'd given it. There had been no question about the door it was coming to. It had known. I do not say this to make any point. I say it so anyone reading this understands. The word is a beacon. The thing follows the beacon. The thing does not have to know where you live or where the door is. You light the beacon and the thing finds the door. The voice cycled. I want to describe this carefully because I don't want anybody to think I'm exaggerating. Over the next 2 hours, the voice on the other side of the south door went through every member of my family. It used my mother's voice for stretches of about 10 or 12 minutes. Then it would switch mid-sentence into my father's voice, then my sister's, then my grandfather's, who had been dead since 2007. It used my mother's brother's voice once, and I had only heard my uncle's voice on a single VHS tape from a family wedding when I was 4, and that voice was perfect. It said small things. It said, "Open the door." It said, "Robbie, it's freezing." It said, "Bo, I made cocoa." It said, "Just for a minute." It said, "I miss you." Then, around 2:30, the voice settled on mine. It used my own voice. It said, "Hey, open up. It's cold." Hearing your own voice from the other side of a door is not a thing I can describe. It made me feel like I was in 2 places at once. I knew I was in the center aisle. I also, for one bad second, was not sure I was in the center aisle. I had to look down at my own hands to confirm where I was standing. Pete had stopped throwing himself at the door. He was lying in front of it now, with his lips still up and his eyes locked on the latch, breathing hard. He had hurt himself doing what he'd done. There was blood on his front shoulder, where he'd torn the skin against the wood. He had not moved. The U in Pen 4 was pushing. I want to be honest about what I did next. The thing at the door was using my voice. It had, by then, said it would freeze to death. It had said it loved me. It had said, in my mother's voice, the lullaby she used to sing me in Norwegian, which her grandmother had taught her, which I had not heard since I was 6. It had asked, in my sister's voice, whether I wanted her to come around to the front door and let herself in with her own key. The thing knew about my sister's key. I do not know how. I had been sitting on the floor of the office for the last 40 minutes, with the door closed, and Pete at the south door, and the phone ringing every 15 minutes from the house. And the U in pen 4 was pushing. I went to her. I left Pete at the south door. I closed the office door behind me. I walked across the aisle and into pen 4, and I crouched down next to the ewe, and I checked her. The first lamb was coming hard. It had a leg back. I had to reach in past my elbow with bare hands because I didn't have time to glove up, and I had to find the leg and push the lamb back enough to bring the leg around. I had done this 12 times that season. I did it again. The lamb came in a rush a minute later, gray and slick, and I cleared its nose and mouth and I rubbed it with a feed sack until it shook. The ewe was already pushing on the second one. The voice at the south door said, "Bo, help me." I said nothing. "Bo, please. I'm so cold." I said nothing. I worked on the ewe. The second lamb came easier. I cleared its mouth too. I sat on the straw with my arms covered to the elbow in birth fluid and the 2 lambs steaming in front of me and the ewe licking the first one, and I did not look at the south door. The voice said, in my voice, "You're a coward." I did not answer. It said it again. "You're a coward, Bo." My mother had never called me a coward. She had not been a person who used that word. The voice using my voice had reached for something it thought would land, and it had picked the wrong thing. That was the first sign I had that the thing was not perfect. I sat in the straw and I held that small thought and I did not let go of it. I sat with the ewe and the lambs through the rest of the night. I called the house every 15 minutes. My father was awake. He stayed in the house. He did not come down. I asked him at one point, around 3:30, whether he could hear anything from the barn, and he said no, he couldn't. The wind had picked up a little around the house, and he couldn't hear past the porch. The voice at the south door went on for another hour, on and off. It cycled. It begged. It threatened, once, in a voice I didn't recognize, and that was not anyone I knew. Pete stayed at the door. He did not let up. At 10 minutes after 4, I heard my father's truck. He had taken the truck the 120 yards from the house to the barn. He had the headlights on. The light came in through the gaps in the north door first, and threw a weak glow into the aisle. Then I heard the truck stop, and the door slam, and his boots on the gravel. He had the rifle. He had the porch light remote in his pocket, the one he used to flick the porch light from the truck. He must have hid it on the way down. The whole yard around the barn was lit now, hard and yellow, the way a house yard gets lit when somebody who lives there decides to be seen. My father came in through the north door. He had the rifle low, pointed at the floor. "Where?" he said. "South door." He walked the length of the aisle. Pete looked up. My father said, "Pete." Pete put his head down on his front paws. My father stood at the south door for a long minute. He did not open it. He listened. Then he said, over his shoulder, without turning around, "Was it your mother?" At first, and then, "Everybody." He nodded. He did not open the door. He stood there for another minute. Then he walked back to the office. He picked up the phone. He called the sheriff. The deputy who came out was a young woman named Janelle Pell, who'd been a Sublette County deputy for about 8 months. She got to the ranch around 4:45. By that time, the porch lights were all on, and the barn lights were on, and the dogs in the lot were barking, and whatever had been at the south door was gone. The ground outside the south door had no prints in it. The ground outside the south door also had no frost. Nothing about the ground outside the south door was the way ground outside a barn at 4:45 on a March morning in Wyoming should have been. Deputy Pell took our statements. She wrote the report. I asked her later for the case number. She gave it to me. It is Sublette County Sheriff -24-0079. The disposition reads, "Trespass. No suspect identified. Investigation suspended." She came back the next afternoon with her field training officer, a man named Ken Halverson, who had been a deputy in the county for 31 years. He walked the south pasture for about 2 hours. He did not say much when he came back to the house. He told my father on the porch, "I know what your father told you about that pasture. I'm telling you the same thing." My father said, "Yeah." Halverson took a long breath. He looked at me, then at my father. He said, I'd been out to your place twice before for things like this. Once in 1998 and once in 2011. Different deputies took both reports. Neither of those reports made it into the case management system, which is something I noticed when I went looking. They're in a paper file in the basement of the substation. I am going to leave them in the paper file. I'm not going to tell my supervisor about this one either. The reason I'm not telling my supervisor is that the last deputy who tried to escalate one of these reports got moved to bailiff duty for a year, and that deputy was me. So I am writing yours up the way it was written up before. Trespass. No suspect. Suspended. My father nodded. Halverson said, "Don't take this the wrong way. The system is not equipped for this. The paper file is the system that is equipped. The paper file is what the old men in the department use. I am going to put yours with the others." He shook my father's hand. He looked at me one more time. He said to me, "Son, don't answer it next time." He left. My father did not, for a long time, tell me what his father had told him about the pasture. He told me eventually on a drive into Pinedale the next summer when I was 20 and we were going to pick up a part for the haybine. He said his father had quit running sheep on the south lease in the early 70s. He had moved them to the upper pasture and never put them back. My father had asked him why, and his father had said, "There are some places you don't put a thing you love. You don't have to know why. You just don't put them there." My father had not put sheep back on the south pasture either. The barn had stayed where it was, because moving a barn is a thing nobody does, but the south pasture had not been used as a pasture in 50 years. It was lease ground that we paid the federal government for, and that we walked once a year to check the fence, and that we did not graze. He had been careful all my life to keep our animals out of it. He had not, the night of the 17th, told me to keep myself out of it. He hired a hand for the rest of the season, which was about 3 weeks. He took the night shifts himself for the rest of that lambing. I went back to school. I came home in May, and the season was done, and the lambs were on summer pasture, and Pete was in the office of the barn on his cushion, and the south door had been chained shut, and a new latch put on it, and a new piece of plywood hung over the inside of the door for reasons I did not ask about. I will tell you the rule, because I owe somebody this, in case the wrong person hears it the wrong way and answers. If you hear a person you've buried in the place you live, do not say their name back. Don't even say yes. A single word from your mouth in their direction is the answer to a question you didn't know was being asked, and the question is whether they're allowed to come closer, and the answer you give is the one they were waiting for. Sit where you are. Tend to what's alive in front of you. Wait for the porch light. Trust the dog. Story 4, The Last Drop. She was standing in my headlights about 60 miles past where I'd refused her, in the same mustard yellow windbreaker, holding the same tan canvas bag, in the same posture, on a stretch of empty highway in central Nevada at 2 a.m. in January. That was when I knew the woman I'd refused outside. Austin had never been a woman. I would like to say I figured it out earlier. I didn't. I had been driving long haul for 31 years, and I had been told things by older drivers, and I had not believed them. And that night out on US Route 50, 60 miles past Austin, the thing in the road in front of my truck made a believer out of me. I am writing this down because my dispatcher told me to. She said if I didn't write it down, I'd convince myself it didn't happen. She knew, because it had happened to her brother in 1987 on a different stretch of road. I'd picked up the load in West Sacramento on a Wednesday afternoon, 40,000 pounds of produce in a reefer trailer, mostly head lettuce and bell peppers, bound for a regional grocery distributor in Salt Lake City. The original routing had been straight up I-80 through the Sierras, but a winter storm had closed Donner Pass for chain controls that afternoon, and my dispatcher had rerouted me south on 50 through Carson City and then east through Fallon and out across the loneliest road in America. The detour added 5 hours and about 200 miles. I'd been doing it long enough to know that detours like that come with the work, and I had called my wife from the truck stop in Fernley to tell her I'd be home a day later than planned, and she'd said she'd save me a plate, and I'd run east into the dark. I'd been driving for myself for 16 years by then. I owned the tractor outright, a 2017 Peterbilt 389, and I leased on with a small freight outfit out of Sparks. My dispatcher was a woman named Rudy Boone, who had taken over the desk from her father about 8 years earlier, and who had been working freight since she was 19. Rudy was 64. Her brother had been a long-haul driver in the 80s, who had driven a tanker off a road outside Tonopah on a clear night in 1987 and walked away from the wreck, unable to say what he'd swerved to avoid. He had not driven again. Rudy had told me about him once on a dispatch call about 3 years before any of this, and I had not asked her any follow-up questions because I had not believed her. I want to be honest about that. My wife's name was Joyce. We'd been married 33 years. She worked at a clinic in Sparks. We had a daughter in Boise and a son who was a paramedic in Eugene. Joyce was the reason I came home. Joyce was the reason I drove. I want to put that on the record before I describe what I describe, because the thing I am about to describe used Joyce's voice on a CB radio in the middle of Nevada on the night of January 17th, 2023, and my wife had nothing to do with that. And I will not have anyone reading this think for a second that the woman who had been my wife for 33 years was anywhere near that road. The hitchhiker was at the gas station on the west edge of Austin, Nevada. The town has one main street, the highway, and a population of about 150. The gas station is the only one for 60 miles in either direction. I had pulled in around midnight to top off and run the truck through a quick walk around. The temperature was around 18 degrees. The wind out of the north was steady. The lot was empty except for one pickup with a Eureka County plate that was running with the heater on, the driver inside a Carhartt with the hood up, eyes closed, head against the window. The truck stop in Austin is the kind of place that's barely a truck stop. It has 6 pumps, a small store, 2 bathrooms, and a coffee maker that has been there since the Reagan administration. The man who ran it that night was the owner, a guy in his 60s with a white mustache, who I had nodded to maybe 20 times over the years and never spoken to. He sat behind the register with a paperback open on the counter. He did not look up when I came in. He did not look up when I came back out. The woman was standing about 10 feet from the door of the truck stop. She was a white woman, about 30, brown hair pulled back, wearing the windbreaker, which was the wrong jacket for the temperature. She had the canvas bag at her feet. She did not have a coat. She did not have a hat. She did not have gloves. She was thin. She was looking at the door of the truck stop as I came out of it with a coffee in my hand. She had not been there when I went in. I want to put that on the record. I'd walked past that exact spot 3 minutes earlier, and the spot had been empty. The lot of the Austin truck stop is small and lit, and a person standing in it is something you notice. There had been nothing in that spot when I'd gone in to get the coffee. When I came out, she was there. She said, "Sir." I stopped. She said, "Are you headed east?" "Yes, ma'am." "Could I trouble you for a ride, just to Ely? My car broke down. I called my brother, and he can come get me there. I have money for gas if you need it." I looked at her. I looked at the canvas bag. I looked at the lot. I want to say I had a feeling. I am not sure I did. What I had was 31 years of company policy that said I did not pick up hitchhikers. I had insurance considerations. I had the basic distrust of strange people on empty roads at midnight that any driver develops in the first year. I had, somewhere underneath that, the small shape of a thought that the woman was wrong, although I could not have told you what I meant by that, and I did not let the thought come up. I said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. Company policy. I can't take passengers. There's a sheriff's substation on the east end of town. They might be able to help you out." She looked at me. She had blue eyes. She did not blink. "Are you sure?" she said. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry." She nodded. She picked up the canvas bag. She walked past me toward the door of the truck stop. I got into the cab of the Peterbilt. I sat there for a minute with the coffee in the cup holder. I watched the door of the truck stop. She did not go inside. She walked around the corner of the building, toward the dumpster on the east side, and she went out of sight. I rolled out of the lot at 12:30. I want to say something about the half hour that followed, because in retrospect it was the only window in which I might have stopped what came next, and I did not stop it. I drove east out of Austin on US 50. The road climbs out of town fast and is dark inside of 2 minutes, and the only thing in the rear view is the small cluster of yellow lights from the gas station, and those lights drop behind the rise and are gone. I drove. I had the cab to myself. I sipped a coffee. I had the radio on. I was thinking about the woman. I want to be clear that I was not thinking about her in any pleasant way. I was not regretting having refused her. I was not feeling guilty. I was thinking about her the way you think about a small thing that didn't sit right, the way you think about a word somebody used in a meeting that wasn't quite the right word, where you keep coming back to it. The thing that was bothering me was that she had been thin and dressed wrong for the weather, and that the lot had been empty when I'd gone in, and that her car, if her car had broken down somewhere, was not in the lot of the gas station. I had not seen another vehicle along the road for the last 10 miles before Austin. I had not passed a broken down car. There had not been a broken down car at the gas station. The story she had told me did not have a place where the car was. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a lot of people get rides at gas stations who don't have a car at the gas station because they have walked or hitched or been dropped off. I told myself the woman was someone's problem and was not my problem. I drove east. The first 60 miles east of Austin on US 50 are some of the most empty road in the United States. There is no town. There is no gas. There is one ranch turnoff at about 40 miles in, and that turnoff goes north into the Toyabe National Forest, and at night in January nobody is on it. The road climbs over Hickson Summit at about 30 miles east of Austin, and then drops into a long basin, and then climbs again over a smaller summit, and then drops toward Eureka. There are stretches of it where you cannot see a single light from any house in any direction. The stars are bright, the air is cold. The radio gets 2 AM stations, one out of Salt Lake City and one out of Las Vegas, and both come and go. I drove. I had the heat on in the cab. I had the radio on low, tuned to the Salt Lake station, which was running an overnight talk show about people who claimed to have been abducted by aliens. I had left the CB on channel 19 out of habit, low volume, in case there was traffic. There was no traffic. I had not seen a vehicle in either direction since I'd left Austin. I saw the windbreaker in my passenger side mirror about 50 miles east of town. It was a flicker, a piece of mustard yellow at the edge of where my taillights threw light onto the shoulder. I leaned forward and looked. It was gone. I waited and watched the mirror for another minute and saw nothing. I told myself I'd seen a piece of trash. The yellow plastic of an old grocery bag would do that. A road reflector on a sign. I told myself to keep driving. I was past Hickson Summit and into the long basin when the CB picked up. The voice was a woman's. It said, "Why didn't you stop?" I sat in the seat. I looked at the radio. The squelch hadn't broken. The channel had been silent for an hour. The voice came again. "Why didn't you stop? It's so cold." I picked up the handset. I keyed it. I said, "Who's on this channel?" There was no answer. I let go of the handset. I sat. I drove. The voice did not come again for about another 15 minutes. Then it did. It said, "I would have been good company." I keyed the handset again. I said, "If you can hear me, identify." Nothing. I drove. I tried to calm down. I told myself somebody was running the road behind me with a CB and was messing with me. The voice had been muffled. Somebody could have been doing an impression. The voice had not actually been the woman from the truck stop. I told myself this. I half believed it. I kept the CB on. I turned the AM radio off. The voice came on the CB about every 10 or 15 minutes for the next 40 miles. It said small things. It said, "I'm cold." It said, "You drive too fast." It said, "Once, my brother was going to pick me up." It said, "Do you have a daughter?" That last one made me cold. I have a daughter. I had not put her name on any decal on the truck. I had not mentioned her to the woman. I keyed the handset and I said, "If you have something to say, say it, otherwise stay off this channel." The voice said, "Joyce." It said my wife's name. It said it the way Joyce's mother had said it, the small softening on the way she ended, the word that her family used and that no one outside her family did. I let go of the handset. I did not key it again. I drove. The figure was in the road about 5 miles east of Eureka. I saw her from a long way off. The road was straight along that stretch, and I had high beams on, and the headlights of the Peterbilt are bright enough to throw a clear cone of light a quarter mile down the highway. She was in the middle of the eastbound lane. She was facing me. She had the canvas bag in her left hand. She had her right hand at her side. She was wearing the windbreaker. She was in the same posture she'd been in when I'd refused her at the gas station 90 minutes earlier and 60 miles back. I did not slow down. I want to say something about the decisions a long-haul driver makes in a moment like that. They are not decisions. They are reflexes. The first reflex is to slow down. The second reflex is to swerve. The third reflex is to lay on the air horn. I did none of those. I held my speed. I held my line. I held the wheel. She did not move out of the road. I came up on her at 65 miles an hour. The headlights threw her shadow long behind her. She did not flinch. She did not raise her hand. She did not turn her head as I approached. The bumper of the Peterbilt closed the distance, and I had to make a decision, and I made it, and I held the lane, and the bumper passed through the place where she was standing. I want to be honest. I closed my eyes for a last second. I did not feel an impact. I did not hear an impact. I opened my eyes about 2 seconds later, and I was 100 yards past her, on an empty road, with a clear view of the highway in front of me. There had been no body under the truck. There had been nothing. I checked my mirrors. In the passenger side mirror, she was standing in the road behind me, in the wash of my taillights, watching the truck go. Her head turned to follow. Her body did not. I watched her head rotate to the side as I pulled away from her, and I watched her body remain pointed in the direction it had been pointed, and the angle her head reached was an angle that would have broken a person's neck. She was not a person. I did not slow down. I reached for the cell phone in the cup holder. I had 2 bars. I called Rudy Boone at the dispatch desk in Sparks, who was on overnight that week, 'cause she always was on overnight that week. She picked up on the first ring. "Boone. It's me. I'm on 50 east of Eureka. I have a situation." "What?" "There's been a person in my road. A woman. I refused a hitchhiker at Austin earlier. I think it's her. I think she's not a real person. I just drove through her at 65 miles an hour and there was no impact." There was a pause. Rudy said, in the voice she used for things that were not jokes, "How many times have you seen her?" "Twice. Maybe 3. There's a voice on the CB. "What's it saying?" "It said my wife's name, Rudy." A longer pause. I could hear her breathing. "Where are you?" she said. "About 8 miles east of Eureka. I'm running for Ely." "How far is Ely?" 70 miles. "Drive." "I'm driving." "I'm staying on the line. Don't hang up. Don't pull over. Don't roll your window down. If she's in the cab with you, don't acknowledge her. Don't look at her. Don't speak to her in any voice. Your wife's name, your daughter's name, your son's name. Don't say anything that belongs to your family. Are you listening?" "I'm listening." "Tell me about your truck. Tell me about anything you want. What's the load?" "Lettuce. Bell peppers. Reefer set to 34. "What's your fuel?" "Half. I topped off at Austin." "Good. Tell me about the road." "It's empty. 2-lane. Clear. Keep talking." I kept talking. I told her about the basin I was driving across, about the speed I was holding, about the temperature on the dashboard. I told her about the sky, which I had not looked at, and which I now looked at because she had asked. The sky was clear. The stars were close. I drove for about 10 minutes. I came around a slow curve. The headlights swept across a stretch of empty highway, and my high beams caught a flash of mustard yellow on the shoulder just at the edge of the cone, and I held my eyes forward and I did not look at it. The voice on the CB came on. It said, "Joyce is awake." I picked up the handset. I clicked it off. I powered the CB down. Rudy said, What was it? It said Joyce was awake. It's lying. How do you know? Because that's what they do. Keep driving. I drove. About 5 minutes later, I caught movement at the edge of my vision. I want to be careful about how I describe this. The Peterbilt has a windshield that wraps around the front of the cab and gives you a clear view of the road, and on either side, mounted on the door pillars, are the side mirrors. Between the windshield and the side window, there is a section of glass and frame. In the dark, in the cab, with the dashboard lit and the headlights on, that section of glass acts like a mirror. You can see, faintly, the reflection of whatever is in the passenger seat. I had not had anything in the passenger seat that night. I had a thermos. I had a paperback book. I had the cell phone, which was in the cup holder. The seat itself was empty. In the reflection in the corner of the windshield, the seat was not empty. There was a figure sitting in it. A woman. The mustard yellow windbreaker, the canvas bag in her lap, her head turned toward me. She was looking at the side of my face. I did not turn my head. I kept the cell phone at my ear. I said, Rudy, what? I'm seeing her in the reflection, in the windshield. The passenger seat is empty. The reflection is not. There was a long pause. Rudy said, how far to Ely? 40 miles. Drive faster. There's no shoulder. I'll lose it on a curve. Drive faster. I drove faster. I pushed the Peterbilt up to 72 and held it there. The road climbed and dropped and curved, and the truck handled it because the road was straight enough on most of the stretch to give me room. I did not look at the reflection. I held my eyes on the road. I held the cell phone at my ear. Rudy stayed on the line. She did not say anything for the next 20 minutes. I could hear her breathing. I could hear typing in the background. She was looking up something on her end. At about 20 miles out from Ely, the cell signal dropped to 1 bar. The voice in the cab said, pull over. I had powered the CB off. The voice was not on the CB. The voice was in the cab. It came from the passenger seat. It was Joyce's voice. It was Joyce's voice the way it was when she was tired, the way she used it on a Sunday night when I'd been on the road for 2 weeks and she just wanted me to come home. It said, pull over, hon, just for a minute. I want to talk to you. I did not turn my head. I did not answer. I held the wheel. It said, hon, please. I said into the cell phone, Rudy, here. It's using her voice. It's telling me to pull over. Rudy said, recite the alphabet. Out loud to me, right now. I started reciting the alphabet. I said it in my own voice, slow into the phone. I got to L. I kept going. I got to T. The voice in the cab kept asking me to pull over. I kept reciting. I got to Z. I started over. I recited the alphabet for the next 18 miles. I did not look at the reflection. I did not stop reciting. The voice in the cab eventually went quiet, somewhere around the third recitation, and I kept going, because I did not trust the quiet. I saw the lights of Ely from about 6 miles out. Ely sits in a basin, and the truck stops on the west end of town are lit up like a small carnival. The Sinclair has a yellow dinosaur sign. The Loneliest Road truck stop has a long row of LED signs. The Petro has the orange and white logo. As I came down off the last grade, the lights spread out below me, and I held my speed all the way down into them, and I did not look at the reflection until I had passed the city limit sign. I rolled into the lot of the Loneliest Road truck stop at about 3:40 in the morning. I parked under the brightest of the LED light poles. I sat in the cab with the engine running and the cell phone at my ear, and I told Rudy I was there. She said, look at the seat. I looked. The passenger seat was empty. I looked at the reflection in the windshield. The reflection of the seat was empty. I climbed down from the cab. My legs were shaking. I walked into the truck stop. The night clerk was a woman in her 50s named Marisol Ortega, who had been working the overnight shift at that location for 9 years. I knew her. I'd been through Ely 100 times. She looked up when the bell on the door rang and she said, "You look like hell." I said, "Marisol, I need a coffee. I need to sit down. I need to ask a favor." She poured the coffee. She came around the counter. We sat at a booth near the window. I told her what had happened. I did not edit it. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I was done, she stood up. She walked behind the counter. She picked up the desk phone and she called somebody. She had a short conversation. She came back to the booth and she said, "I'm pulling the lot footage." She had a small office in the back of the store. She walked me back. She brought up the footage from the camera that covered the truck side of the lot. She rewound it. She found the moment my Peterbilt pulled in. She watched it through. The truck pulled in. The driver door opened. I climbed down. I walked toward the store. I was the only thing that moved. The passenger door of the truck did not open. Nothing got out of the cab on the passenger side. The lot around the truck was empty. We watched the footage 3 times. Marisol looked at me. She did not say anything. She rewound the footage further. She showed me the lot for the 10 minutes before I'd pulled in. The lot was empty except for 2 trucks parked at the far end and a Honda CR-V that belonged to the night cook. The lot was lit. There was no figure walking up the road from the west. There was nothing in the wash of the headlights of the Peterbilt as it came into the camera's field of view. Marisol said, "I have seen this before." "Seen what?" "A driver coming in from 50, looking like you look, pulling into the lot like he's running from something, asking me to check the tape." "How many times?" 4, maybe 5, over 9 years. The last one was about 18 months ago. He was a younger guy, drove for one of the bigger companies. Same kind of story. Picked up a hitchhiker, refused her, then she was on the road. He'd seen her. We watched the tape. He'd come in alone, like you came in alone. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to go home. I told him to call his wife. I told him to file a report with his dispatcher and to drive somebody else's route the next time he came through." He did all those things. He still drives, as far as I know. He doesn't drive 50 at night. She looked at me a long time. "I'm not telling you what it is. I don't know what it is. I have my idea. People in this town have their idea. I'm telling you what I tell every driver who comes in like you came in. Go home. Don't drive 50 after sundown for a year. Don't say her description out loud to anyone who isn't taking it down for a report. Don't think about her in your truck. The thinking is the door. You drove the rest of it out tonight by reciting the alphabet. Your dispatcher made you do that. Your dispatcher knows what she's doing. Now go home." I did what she said. I called Joyce. It was almost 4 in the morning. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice was thick with sleep. She said, "Han." "What? Are you okay?" "Yes, I am okay. What time is it?" "It's late. I'm sorry. I just wanted to hear you." She was quiet for a second. She said, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay. I'll tell you when I get home." I hung up. I stayed in Ely until first light. I slept 3 hours in the cab in the lot under the light pole. I drove to Salt Lake the next afternoon and dropped the load. I drove home on the 2nd night. I told Joyce. She listened the way she listens. She did not tell me I was crazy. She did not tell me I was right. She held my hand at the kitchen table and she said, "I'm glad you came home. I filed an incident note with Boone Freight on Monday." Rudy assigned it the reference, Boone Freight -23-011. The note is a single page. It says, "I encountered an unidentified roadway pedestrian in the eastbound lane of US Route 50 between milepost 279 and milepost 321, that no impact occurred, that the pedestrian was observed to follow the truck at distance, and that no further action was taken. The note is in the file. The note will stay in the file." Rudy keeps a separate file for these incidents in the bottom drawer of her desk. I have asked her how many notes are in the drawer. She has not told me. I drove for 6 more years after that night. I retired in 2029. I do not drive at night anymore. I do not drive 50 in either direction. When I take long trips with Joyce in the car, we leave at dawn and we are off the road by sundown, and we sleep in motels in towns where the lights stay on all night. About 4 months after the trip, I called Rudy and asked her how many notes were in the drawer. I had been thinking about it. She told me she would not give me a number, but that she had pulled the drawer that morning to add mine and had counted, and the count was a number she was not going to say out loud over the phone, and that the oldest note in the drawer was from 1973. She said her father had started the drawer. She said she expected she would hand it to whoever took the desk after her. She said most of the notes were from drivers who did not want to file with their company because they did not want to be on a list, and that the drawer was, in effect, a list anyway, but a list nobody outside the desk had access to. I asked her if I should be worried about being on the list. She said no. She said being on the list was the safest thing about being on the list. I did not entirely understand what she meant by that. She did not explain it. If somebody flags you down on a dark road at the edge of a small town and asks you for a ride, and you say no, and you see them again later, do not stop, do not slow, do not look directly at them as you pass. Do not pick up the CB to talk to them or to anyone else who comes on the air sounding like somebody you love. Hold the lane, hold the wheel. Recite something, anything, that comes out of you in your own voice, and don't stop reciting until your truck is in a lot full of other trucks under lights you can name. The thing in the road wants you to slow down. The thing in the road wants you to use a name. Don't give it either one. Story 5. Lookout Relief. The supply helicopter was due at 6 in the morning. It was just before 8 at night, and the thing on the radio knew Hollis's call sign, knew the check-in protocol, and knew my name. 10 hours stood between me and the next person who would come looking. I locked the catwalk door, killed the interior light in the cab, and sat in the dark on the floor under the desk, with my back against the metal wall and the radio on receive only. Whatever was outside started up the stairs at 9:45. It was on the catwalk by 10. It walked a slow circuit around the tower for the rest of the night, and I did not move, and I did not answer, and I did not look at the door. I worked seasonally for the United States Forest Service out of the Ruby Mountain Ranger District, based in Wells, Nevada. I'd been a relief lookout for 2 seasons. The Pearl Peak Lookout sits at 10,430 feet on a granite spine in the Ruby Mountains, about 30 miles south-southeast of Wells as the helicopter flies, and a long bad jeep road and a steeper foot trail away from any paved road. The tower is a Forest Service standard, live in cab style, 14 by 14 feet, sitting on a 4-legged steel frame about 30 feet off the ground, with a wraparound catwalk and a single steel staircase up the south side. It had been built in 1964, replaced in 1991 with new framing, and was on a list of towers the Forest Service had been intending to either retire or fully refurbish for the better part of a decade. The regular lookout that year was a man named Wendell Hollis. He was 67 years old. He had been a Forest Service lookout for 31 summers, 14 of them on Pearl Peak, and he was, by every measure I knew, the most experienced lookout in the district. He took the tower from June through October. The district sent up 2 relief lookouts during his season to cover his off-rotation, 4 days a month. I was one of those 2. The other was a man named Dean Yamashiro, who I had worked with my first season, and who was on a different tower that month. I climbed up to Pearl Peak on the afternoon of September 15th, 2024, for a 4-day rotation. Hollis was supposed to come down. I was supposed to come up. The plan had been simple. The plan had been the same plan I had executed twice before that summer. The plan did not survive the parking area at the trailhead. The Forest Service road that goes up to the trailhead for Pearl Peak ends at a small dirt turnaround at about 8,000 feet. There is room for maybe 4 vehicles. When I drove up at 3 in the afternoon, Hollis's truck was parked there. It was a green 1998 Chevy K 2500 with a Forest Service decal on the door. He had owned that truck for the entire time I had known him. The truck was locked. The hood was cold. There was a thin layer of dust on the windshield. The truck had not been moved that day. I parked next to it. I shouldered my pack. I started up the foot trail which is about 2.5 miles from the trailhead to the base of the tower, with elevation gain of roughly 2,400 feet. I was at the base of the tower, a little after 4:30. Hollis was not at the base. Hollis was not on the catwalk. Hollis was not in the cab. The catwalk door was padlocked from the outside. The Forest Service standard procedure for a lookout coming down off rotation is the lookout secures the cab from the inside, exits, locks the catwalk door from the outside with a padlock, and hangs the key on a hook inside the steel framework at the base of the stairs, behind a small panel only Forest Service personnel know about. The relief lookout climbs up, retrieves the key, unlocks the catwalk door, takes possession of the cab. This is what I had done my first 2 rotations. This is what I expected to do. The key was not on the hook. I want to be careful here, because I am going to describe a sequence of small failures of expectation that, taken together, told me before I had finished the climb that something was wrong. Hollis's truck at the trailhead, but Hollis not at the cab. The catwalk door locked from the outside, which it should not have been if Hollis was inside, but the key not on the hook, which it should have been if Hollis had locked it from outside and gone down. The combination did not work in either direction. I stood at the base of the steel frame with my pack on the ground, and I tried to think of an explanation. I picked up my handheld radio. I keyed dispatch, Wells Dispatch. This is Pearl Peak Relief. Do you copy? A pause. Then a man's voice. Pearl Peak Relief, Wells Dispatch, go ahead. That was Sam Kowalski. He had been the Wells District dispatcher for 9 years. He worked the day shift. His shift ended at 6. I was glad he was still on. Sam, I'm at the base of Pearl Peak. Hollis's truck is at the trailhead. The catwalk door is padlocked from the outside. The key is not in the usual location. Has Hollis checked in today? Long pause. I heard him typing. Pearl Peak Relief, no check-in from Hollis today. Last check-in is from yesterday at 2000. He acknowledged your rotation start. He confirmed clear conditions. He did not radio this morning. We had not noted it because we expected him to come off the mountain today. The lack of a morning check-in is consistent with him beginning his off-rotation. Copy. Sam, the truck is at the trailhead. He didn't come down. A longer pause. Copy that. Stand by. I stood by. I sat down on a rock near the base of the stairs, and I drank water from the bottle in my pack. I looked up at the cab 30 feet above me. The windows were dark. The cab was the same as I had last seen it. The catwalk railing was the same. The door at the top of the stairs, with its padlock, was the same. There was nothing about the tower that suggested Hollis was in it. There was also nothing about the tower that suggested he was not. Sam came back on. Pearl Peak Relief. You have authorization to break the padlock and access the cab. Use the bolt cutter in your kit. I'm logging this as an unscheduled access event. Report back when you're inside. Do not call out to Hollis until you've cleared the cab and the catwalk visually. That last instruction surprised me. I asked him to repeat it. Do not call out to Hollis until you've cleared the cab visually. If he's hurt inside, he'll respond to your physical presence. If he's not in the cab, then there's somebody else on this mountain, and I do not want you announcing your arrival to that person from the base of the tower. Copy. I cut the padlock. I climbed the stairs slowly. I stepped out onto the catwalk. The catwalk was empty. I walked the perimeter of the cab. I saw nothing through the windows that suggested Hollis was inside. I tried the cab door. It was unlocked. I did not call out. I opened the door. The cab was empty. The desk was the same desk it had been on my last rotation. The Osborne firefinder sat in the center. The radio was on, set to the district frequency, volume turned down. The logbook was open. Hollis's pen was lying across the open page. His coffee mug was on the desk next to the logbook. I touched the side of the mug. It was warm. The logbook was open to the page for that day. The last entry was a partial sentence. It read, in Hollis's small, careful handwriting, wind shifted at 15:30, smoke column to the south-southeast at approximately. The sentence stopped there. There was no period. I stood in the cab. The radio at my belt clicked. Sam, on the channel, Pearl Peak Relief status. Sam, the cab is empty. Hollis's coffee is still warm. The logbook is open mid-sentence. He was in here within the last hour. His truck is at the trailhead. He didn't come down. A pause. Pearl Peak Relief, secure the cab. I am calling this in. Do not leave the cab. We are going to organize a search. The earliest we can get a helicopter on the mountain is 6 in the morning. The earliest we can get foot personnel up there is midnight if we leave Wells in the next hour. Stand by while I get the duty officer. Copy. I locked the cab door from the inside. I did not put the padlock back on the outside because there was no longer a reason to. The padlock was a symbol. It would not have kept anything out. I sat at the desk. I did not move Hollis's pen. I did not close his logbook. I made a fresh entry on a separate sheet of paper, documenting my arrival, the condition of the truck at the trailhead, the condition of the cab, the temperature of the coffee mug. I noted the time as 16:47. I did the things you are supposed to do in a fire lookout cab. I checked the weather instruments on the catwalk. I noted the wind, which was light out of the southwest. I noted the temperature, which was 42 and dropping. I noted the visibility, which was unlimited. I scanned the horizon in all 4 directions with the binoculars, and I saw nothing that looked like smoke. I made a radio check on the working channel, and I made a second one on the private channel. Both came back clean. I unpacked the food I had brought up, 2 days of cold meals, because I did not want to use Hollis's stove and his pots, and I set up a bedroll on the cot in the corner. I did not eat from his food. I did not drink from his coffee mug. I did not sit in his chair. I want to put that on the record because, in retrospect, I think the only reason I did not is that I had been raised by my grandmother, who was a Basque immigrant from a village outside Bilbao, and who had told me when I was small that you do not consume the food of a missing person. She had said this to me when I was 8 years old at the kitchen table after a neighbor's husband had not come back from a fishing trip on Lake Tahoe, and the neighbor had brought over a casserole, and my grandmother had thrown the casserole away. I had asked her why. She had said, because the dish is still asking. Eat from a finished plate. I had not understood her. I had understood her later. I understood her again that afternoon in the cab. The sun set at 7:04. The first thing happened at 7:30. I was sitting at the desk eating a granola bar and watching the south side window when the radio came alive with Hollis's voice. Wells Dispatch, this is Pearl Peak. Do you copy? I set the granola bar down. I stared at the radio. The voice was Hollis's. It was completely his. I had worked with him for 2 seasons. I had heard him on the radio probably 100 times. The voice was his. A pause on the channel. Then Sam, careful. Pearl Peak, Wells Dispatch, identify. Wells, this is Pearl Peak. This is Hollis. I'm at the truck. I'm sorry I'm late checking in. I had a problem on the descent. I need the relief lookout to come down to the trailhead and give me a hand. I stood up. I looked out the south side window. The trailhead was not visible from the cab. It was 2 miles down the trail and below the ridge, and I could not see anything except the slope falling away toward the timber. Sam came back on. Pearl Peak, what's the nature of the problem? I rolled my ankle. I'm at the truck. I can't drive out. I need somebody to bring me a wrap and help me into the passenger seat. I picked up my handheld. I went to a different channel. The Forest Service has a working channel and a private channel that the dispatchers use for sensitive communications. I went to private. I keyed, Sam. Confirm you and I are alone on this. Confirmed. Sam. I am in the cab. I am looking at Hollis's coffee. I drank from his coffee mug. The coffee is still warm. The logbook entry from 15:30 is half finished. Hollis did not have time to walk down to the trailhead. He did not have time to roll his ankle and call in. Whoever is on the working channel is not Hollis. A long silence. Then Sam said, copy. Stay on private. Do not respond to working. I'm going to keep talking to it. Copy. I went back to the working channel on receive. I did not key. Sam said, on working. Pearl Peak. Stand by while I locate the relief lookout. I'm having trouble raising him. The voice that was not Hollis said, He's at the trailhead with me already. He drove me out. I'm calling you from the truck. He's the one who told me to call. He says hi. The hair on my arms stood up. I had not been at the trailhead. I had been in the cab for the last 3 hours. The voice was using me as a prop in a story it was telling Sam. It was building a version of events in which I had already left the tower and was already with Hollis at the trailhead. It was building cover for what would happen if I disappeared. Sam said, unworking. Pearl Peak. Ask the relief to come on the air. The voice said, He's busy with the rap. Hold on. There was a pause of about 5 seconds. Then a different voice came on the channel. It was my voice. Wells, this is the relief. I'm with Hollis at the truck. He's all right. I'm wrapping the ankle. We'll be out of the trailhead in about 20 minutes. I sat in the cab and I listened to my own voice coming out of the radio. I had not in my life heard a recording of myself that I had not been able to identify as a recording. The voice on the radio was not a recording. It was my voice the way it was right now. The voice on the radio was the voice I would have used if I had been speaking. It had my small habits. It used the word all right the way I used it. It had the slight rasp I get when I have been at altitude for a few hours. I closed my eyes. I held very still. Sam, on private, said, I heard that. I heard you. Are you on the air? No. Copy. I am going to dismiss this transmission as compromised. I'm going to log a possible radio interference event on Pearl Peak. I'm going to keep the channel monitored. I am not going to send anybody up there tonight. I want you to lock the cab. I want you to kill the interior light. I want you to put your radio on the private channel on receive only. I want you to not transmit unless you have to. I want you to wait for the supply helicopter at 6. The pilot will be Walt Freehoff. He has been doing supply on these towers for 18 years. He knows his way around. When the helicopter's rotors are over the helipad, you can come out. Not before. Do you understand? I understand. How are you holding up? I'm holding. Good man. I'm here all night. You're not alone. The radio in the cab on the working channel kept talking for the next 2 hours. The voice that was Hollis spoke to dispatch. It described the descent. It described the truck. It described, at one point, a conversation with me about my drive up. The conversation was not a conversation I had had. It was a conversation I would have had if I had had it. The voice that was me responded at the right places. I sat in the dark and I listened to a fictional account of a normal evening at the trailhead, narrated by 2 voices, one of them mine. At 9:15, the working channel gave out a sound that I am going to describe even though I do not entirely know how to describe it. It went silent for about 10 seconds. Then it gave out a noise that was the sound of a man inhaling, slow, like he was about to speak. Then it spoke, in Hollis's voice, Are you listening to this? I did not move. The radio went silent again. A few seconds later, the voice, now in my voice, said, I know you are. Sam, on private, said, Don't engage. I did not engage. At 9:40, I heard footsteps at the base of the tower. I want to be careful about what I describe and how. I was in a cab 30 feet off the ground, at 10,430 feet of elevation, on a granite spine, on a clear night with no wind. The cab is quiet at night. You can hear sounds from a long way off. Footsteps at the base of the tower, on gravel, are clearly audible from inside the cab. The footsteps were unhurried. They walked up to the base of the steel frame. They paused. Then they began to climb the stairs. Forest Service tower stairs are steel grate. They make a particular ringing sound under boots. The sound of a person climbing them is unmistakable. Whatever was on the stairs sounded like a person climbing them. It moved at the pace a person climbs steel grate stairs, with a small pause at each landing. It reached the catwalk. It walked a slow circuit, around the cab, past the south window, past the east window, past the north window, past the west window, back to the south. It did not stop at any window. It did not look in. I could not see it because I had killed the interior lights and I had not opened any of the curtains, but I could hear it, and it walked past each of the four sides of the cab in turn. It made one circuit, then it made another, then another. It walked around the cab for the next 5 hours. I sat under the desk with my back against the wall and the radio on receive on private. Sam stayed on the line. He did not say much. Every 15 or 20 minutes he said, "Still with you." I said, "Copy." I did not say more. Around 11, the voice started. It used Hollis's voice first. From outside the door, it said, "Hey, open up. It's freezing. I just hiked the trail back up because I forgot a thing in the cab. Open up." That lasted about 10 minutes. I did not respond. The footsteps continued. It moved to my voice next. From outside the door, it said, "Hey, it's me. I'm back. I left my pack. Open up." I did not respond. The footsteps continued. It cycled. It used my mother's voice, which I had not heard from in 9 years. My mother is alive. She lives in Reno. I have not spoken to her since 2015. The voice that was hers said small private things, the way the voice that had been Hollis had said things only Hollis would say. It used my older brother's voice. He died of an overdose in 2019. It used my ex-wife's voice. It used the voice of a man I had worked with at a different ranger district, who had not died, who was alive in Boise, but whose voice I had not heard in 18 months. I want to describe what it is like to sit under a steel desk in a 14 by 14 foot cab 30 feet off the ground, while a thing wearing the voices of every person in your life walks the catwalk outside the door. The desk is small. I am not a small person, and I had to put my knees up against my chest and tuck my chin down, and the radio was at my collarbone, and I could not feel my feet within the first hour because they had gone to sleep. The cab was cold. The interior temperature dropped into the high 30s because I would not get up to start the propane heater. I had a fleece in my pack and I pulled it over me, but I did not zip it up because I did not want to make noise. The voices outside the door were perfect. I want to say this without overstating it. I am the only person who could have known whether they were perfect, and they were. The thing that used my mother's voice used the version of her voice that had said things to me before 2015, which was the version I would have remembered. The thing that used my brother's voice used the version that had said things to me the year before he died, which was the version I would have remembered. The thing was reading me. It was pulling things out of me and putting them back in voices it had built for the occasion. It was good at this. I am sure it had been good at this for a long time. I closed my eyes for most of it. I kept them closed because I did not want to look at the door. I had not looked at the door since I had gotten under the desk, and I did not want to look at it now. I had a bad feeling that if I looked at the door, I would see the latch move, and that the latch moving would be the worst thing I had ever seen, and I would not be able to unsee it. I do not know whether the latch moved. I never looked. It went on for hours. At about 3 in the morning, the footsteps stopped. I sat under the desk and I listened. The cab was silent. The catwalk was silent. The radio on private was silent. Sam came on after about 10 minutes and said, "Still with you." I said, "Copy." I do not know whether the thing left at 3 or whether it stayed and did not move. I did not look out a window. I did not get up from under the desk. I sat there. At 5:30 I heard, very far off to the north, the sound of a helicopter. I sat under the desk and I listened to it. The sound got louder. The helicopter came in from Wells. It made its approach to the helipad on the south side of the tower. The rotors got loud. The pilot keyed his radio. "Pearl Peak Relief. This is Whiskey Foxtrot 904. I'm landing. ETA to skid down. 90 seconds. I keyed my handheld for the first time in 7 hours. Whiskey Foxtrot. Copy. I am inside the cab. Stay on your radio. Copy. Freehoff here. Sam briefed me. I'll hold on the pad with the rotors running until you come out. The helicopter landed on the helipad. The rotor stayed on. I waited until the floodlight from the bird came on and lit the catwalk in white. I unlatched the cab door. I stepped out. The catwalk was empty. There was nothing on the gravel at the base of the tower. There were no prints. The morning was clear. The sun was coming up over the East Humboldts. I walked down the stairs to the helipad. Walt Freehoff was sitting in the pilot's seat with the door open. He was an older man, maybe 60. He looked at me, and he did not ask me how my night had been. He said, "Get in. We're going to Wells." "What about Hollis?" "We're going to look for him on the way down. Sam has search and rescue staging at the trailhead. We'll have eyes on the slopes by sunrise. Get in." I got in. We found Hollis at about 8:30 that morning. He was sitting on a rock on a slope about 10 miles east of Pearl Peak in his red jacket, with no pack, no water, no boots. He was barefoot. His feet were not injured. He did not have any cuts or scrapes. He was alive. He had been outside in temperatures below freezing for a minimum of 18 hours, and he was not hypothermic. He looked at the search and rescue team when they came up to him, and he did not recognize them. He did not recognize me. He did not remember leaving the cab. He did not remember writing the partial entry in the logbook. He did not remember the last time he had eaten. He was disoriented. He was not afraid. He went with the team without asking any questions. The slope where Hollis was sitting was a slope that, by any reasonable measure, he could not have walked to in 18 hours. The terrain between Pearl Peak and his location is broken and steep and crossed by 2 drainages and a band of cliffs. A fit person in daylight with a map and water would have a hard time covering it in a day. Hollis is 67 years old. He had no shoes. The bottoms of his feet were clean. There was no dirt under his fingernails. His jacket was not torn. The search and rescue team lead, a woman named Susan Pell, who had been doing search and rescue in Elko County for 15 years, told me later that she had not been able to track him backwards from where we had found him. There were no tracks leading to the rock. He had simply been on the rock at sunrise with his eyes open, looking east at the rising sun. He spent 4 days in the hospital in Elko. The doctors found nothing physically wrong with him. He recovered. He has not gone back to Pearl Peak. He retired at the end of that season. He lives in a small house in Spring Creek now, and he does not talk about the mountain. The Forest Service incident report number for that night is RDR-24-009. The official disposition is lookout disorientation event, possible radio interference from atmospheric conditions, contributing factor to lookout temporary displacement. The atmospheric conditions language is the language Sam Kowalski put in the report, with the duty officer's signature. That language is also in 2 earlier reports from Pearl Peak that I went looking for after my night. Both of those reports are dated in the late 1970s. Both involve a lookout who was found alive away from the tower with no memory of leaving. Neither report uses any word that names what I am saying I encountered. Neither report needs to. The Ruby Mountain Ranger District issued an internal memo in December of 2024, formally moving Pearl Peak to a 2-person minimum staffing requirement during fire season, effective the following summer. The memo did not give a reason. The ranger who signed it, a woman who had been with the district for 22 years, told me when I asked that the memo was the kind of memo that does not need a reason. I have a copy of that memo in a folder at home. I do not work seasonally for the Forest Service anymore. I called Sam Kowalski once, about 6 months later, to ask him a question. I asked him what would have happened if I had keyed the radio at any point during those 3 hours under the desk. He thought about it before he answered. He said he did not know for certain. He said he thought the thing on the catwalk had been waiting for me to make it real. He said voices on the working channel could be dismissed as interference, and footsteps on a steel grate could be dismissed as a deer or a person, but a transmission from the cab during the encounter would have created a recorded sound file in the dispatch system that the system did not know how to dismiss. He said the thing wanted to be on the recording. He said the recording would have been the thing. I did not entirely follow what he meant. I have thought about it since. I think I understand it now, and I wish I did not. Story 6. Ditchwalker. There was a man crouched at my head gate, wearing my uniform. When the headlight of my truck caught his shoulder, I read my own name stitched on the patch. He stood up and he turned around. And the face was mine too. The eyes were not mine. He spoke in my voice, and he asked me to come closer to check the gate, and I did not go closer. And I am writing this down because that decision was the only good decision I made that whole morning. And I would like for any other ditch rider working the lower Rio Grande Valley alone in the dark to know that the decision is available to them too. I work for the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. My title is Irrigation Ditch Rider. I have held that title for 15 years. My father held it for 31 years before me, and his father held a related title under the predecessor agency from 1944 until 1979. The job is what it sounds like. We ride a stretch of irrigation ditch in a district truck, and we open and close head gates for the farmers in our section. We monitor flows. We report breaches and damage. We run the channel maintenance schedule. My section runs from the south end of Socorro down through the bosque past San Antonio and almost to the Bosque del Apache refuge. It is about 34 miles of canal and lateral and field gate, depending on where you count the boundaries. I know it the way a man knows the layout of his own house at night. I have walked every foot of it. My grandfather, who was born in Belen in 1917, started with the Conservancy District in the year it was reorganized after the war. He had ridden a horse on his rotations until 1962. He had switched to a truck only when the district told him he had to. He had retired in 1979 and had died in 1991. He had told me, when I was 7 and going on rounds with him in his retirement, that the bosque was a place that belonged to itself, and that we were guests in it, and that the polite thing to do as a guest was to keep your eyes on what you came to do. He had not at any point told me what would happen if you did not keep your eyes on what you came to do. I had assumed it was a thing he had said to be poetic. My grandfather had not, looking back on it, been a poetic man. My father had ridden the same section. He had retired in 2015 at the age of 62 and was still alive, and he and my mother lived in a small adobe in Limitar, 20 miles north of where the gate at 274 sits in the bosque. My father had said one thing to me when he had handed off the section that I had remembered. He had said, "Don't take the pre-dawn rotation alone if you can help it. If you can't help it, don't stop the truck unless you have to. And if you stop the truck, don't get out at a gate where the dog wouldn't get out." We had not had a dog. He had not explained the metaphor. I had taken it as good advice, and I had not in 15 years of running that section asked him to explain. The shift on the morning I am going to describe started at 3:30 in the morning on the 8th of October, 2023. I was on the pre-dawn headgate rotation, which we run from the start of the irrigation season in March through the end of the season in October. The work is to drive a fixed route that hits 6 head gates in sequence, opening each one to a flow set by the previous afternoon's water order before the farmers come out at first light to check their fields. I had been running that route on and off for 15 years. I knew every gate. I knew every lateral. I knew which farmer ran which section. The route, in order, hit gate 271A, gate 272, gate 273, gate 274, gate 275, and gate 276. The numbering is district nomenclature. The gates themselves are old. Most of them date to the 1930s, under the original WPA work. The concrete is good. The hardware has been replaced piecemeal over the decades. That morning, the temperature at the district yard was 47 degrees. There was no wind. The bosque, when I drove into it, was wrapped in a low fog that sat about waist high over the irrigation ditches and made the headlights of the truck look like they were cutting through milk. I had a thermos of coffee in the cup holder. I had the district radio on the dashboard, set to channel 1 for district traffic and channel 3 for Socorro County Sheriff Dispatch, low volume. I had my wife's voice in my head from the kitchen where she had said, when I'd kissed her on the way out the door, "Drive careful." She always said that. She had been saying it since the first morning I had taken the pre-dawn rotation. It was as automatic as a benediction. I checked in with district dispatch at 3:40. The dispatcher that morning was a woman named Lupe Vigil, who'd been on the desk for 9 years and who knew the route by heart. She acknowledged me. I rolled out. Gate 271A is closest to the yard. It is at the north end of the bosque section, off a county road, set into a concrete apron at the edge of a small acequia that feeds about 90 acres of alfalfa belonging to a man named Mr. Romero. I opened it at 3:52. The flow came up the way it should have come up. I noted the time and the flow in the log on my clipboard. I climbed back into the truck. Gate 272 is 2.5 miles south, off a dirt access road that drops down off the county road into the bosque. The bosque in that section is mostly cottonwood and Russian olive, with a thick understory of salt cedar in places. The road is a single track. The fog was thicker the further south I drove. I came down the access road at about 10 miles an hour with the high beams on, and I came around the last bend and I parked at the apron of gate 272, and I climbed out of the truck. The coyote was on the apron. I want to describe this carefully. A coyote on a head gate apron is not, by itself, a strange thing. The bosque is full of coyotes. They drink at the water. They scavenge. They cross the gates, because the gates are a convenient way to get from one side of a ditch to the other. A dead coyote on a head gate apron is also not a strange thing. They get hit by trucks. They get caught in things. They die. The coyote on the apron of gate 272 had not been hit. It had not been caught in anything. It was lying in the exact center of the concrete, lengthwise, with its body parallel to the line of the gate. Its front legs were tucked under its chest. Its back legs were straight behind it. Its head was pointed downstream. Its mouth was closed. Its eyes were closed. It looked like a dog asleep at the foot of a person's bed. There was no blood. There was no smell. The body was not stiff. I touched it with the tip of my boot. It moved like a body that had died within the last hour, possibly less. I keyed the radio on channel 1. Lupe, Vega here, gate 272. Go. Got a coyote on the apron. Dead. Looks placed. Want me to move it before I open the gate. A pause. Placed how? Lengthwise. Centered. No injuries I can see. A longer pause. Move it. Note it. Keep going. Copy. I dragged the coyote off the apron with my gloved hands. It was warm. I put it in the salt cedar at the edge of the access road, and I noted the time and the location on the log. I opened the gate. The flow came up. I climbed back into the truck. Gate 273 is 1 mile further south, on a parallel access road that runs through a denser section of bosque. I had not been there in 3 weeks. The last time I had been there, I had checked the gate hardware with a flashlight, made a small adjustment to the wheel, and driven out. The road in had been dry and unmarked. The bosque in that section is heavy enough that vehicle tracks sit in the dust for weeks if there is no rain, and there had been no rain in October. I came down the access road at about 10 miles an hour with the high beams on. The road in front of me had truck tracks on it. They were fresh. They were the tread pattern of district truck tires. They were the same tread pattern as the tires on my truck. There were no other vehicles in the Conservancy district that ran that pattern. I knew that because I had argued with our motor pool lead about the tread pattern in February. The tracks went south. They went down the access road in front of me in the direction I was driving. They were the only tracks on the road. They had not been there 3 weeks ago, and they had not been there 4 hours ago when the last patrol had checked the road. They were going where I was going. I keyed the radio. Lupe, go. There are truck tracks on the access road to gate 273. Same tread pattern as our trucks, going south. A pause. Are you behind another district unit? No. Hold. I sat in the truck. I did not turn the engine off. I kept my foot on the brake. The bosque around me was quiet. The fog moved a little, and the high beams, the way fog moves when nothing has disturbed it. I waited. Lupe came back. Vega. There is no other district unit south of the yard right now. Nobody's run that road since yesterday evening, 1640. The roller crew was out. They came back. The tread pattern on a roller crew truck is different. You should not be following truck tracks on that road. Copy. Do you want a deputy? I sat with that. The bosque is rural. Sheriff deputies are not close. The closest deputy on duty at 4 in the morning was probably 20 minutes out, and the closest deputy who could get into the bosque on that access road was probably 40 minutes out. By the time a deputy could be at gate 273, I would have been at gate 273 for some time, alone, with whoever had made the tracks. Send a deputy to my last known and have him hold there. I'm going to keep going. I'll radio in at every gate. Copy. Sending. Deputy Padilla, Socorro County. I'm putting him on channel 3. Copy. I drove south. I followed the tracks. They were not perfectly fresh. They had a small layer of dust on them, the kind that settles onto a track inside of about an hour. They were a track somebody else had made them, and that somebody had not, evidently, gone back out. Gate 273 came up around a curve. The tracks went straight to the gate apron. They stopped at the apron. There was no truck on the apron. There was no truck anywhere I could see. The bosque on either side of the road was thick enough that a truck could not have driven into it. The tracks stopped on the apron and there was nothing where they ended. I sat in the truck. I keyed the radio. Lupe. Tracks end at the apron. There's no vehicle. There's no place for one to go. Copy. Padilla's en route. Are you in the truck? In the truck. Doors locked. Stay in the truck. Eyes open. Keep the engine running. Copy. I did not get out to open the gate. I sat with the engine running and the heat on and the high beams on the apron, and I watched the apron for about 3 minutes. Nothing moved. The water was running through the existing flow at the gate. The gate was closed. The flow was at 0. I would have needed to get out to open it. I was supposed to get out to open it. I was the only person whose job it was to get out and open it. I keyed the radio. Lupe. I'm going to skip 273 for now. I'll come back with a deputy. Continuing to 274. Copy. I backed the truck up. I turned around at the next pullout. I drove out of the bosque on the access road and back up to the county road and south to the access road for gate 274, which is about 2 miles further down. The fog was thicker. The eastern sky had not started to lighten yet. It was about 4:20. The access road for gate 274 is the longest of the 6. It runs about half a mile through Cottonwood Gallery before it drops down to the gate. The gate sits on a wider concrete apron at the junction of a main lateral and a smaller field ditch. There is a small outbuilding at the gate, an old district shed about 6 feet by 8 feet that holds spare valve hardware. The shed has a padlock on the door. The padlock is district issue. I drove down the access road. The high beams cut through the fog. I came around the last curve. There was a man crouched at the gate. He was crouched the way a ditch rider crouches when he is checking a wheel on the balls of his feet, with one hand on the concrete and one hand on the wheel handle. He was wearing a district uniform. The uniform was the right green color. The shoulder patch on his right sleeve faced me as I came around the curve, and the high beams of my truck lit the patch directly. The patch was the district patch. Below the district patch, on the same sleeve, there was a name strip stitched into the fabric. The strip read, Vega. I stopped the truck. I sat. The high beam stayed on him. He stayed crouched. He did not turn his head. He did not move. I keyed the radio. Lupe, there's a man at gate 274. He's wearing a district uniform. The patch says my name. A long pause. Lupe said, Vega, repeat. There is a man crouched at the gate. He's in a district uniform. The name strip on the sleeve is mine. Padilla. Did you copy that? A different voice on channel 3. Scratchier. Copy. I'm 15 out from the gate. Vega, do not engage. Stay in the truck. Copy. The man at the gate stood up. He stood up the way I stand up. I have a small habit when I stand from a crouch where I push off with my left hand against my left thigh because I had a knee surgery in 2016 and the right knee is still a little weak. He did that. He pushed off his left thigh. He stood up to a man's full height. He turned around. The face was my face. I do not have a way to make this less unsettling than it is. The face was my face, the way a face is your face in a mirror. Every line, every gray hair at my temples, every crease around my eyes. The face under the brim of the district cap was my face. The cap was set on his head the way I set my cap on my head. The hair under the cap was the way my hair was under my cap. The mustache was my mustache, a little gray, trimmed the way I trimmed it. The eyes were not my eyes. I want to be careful about how I say this. The eyes were the right shape. They were the right color. They were set in the face, the way my eyes are set in my face. They were also too still. They were the eyes of a thing that was not looking at me the way a person looks at another person. They were the eyes of a thing that was studying me. They were the eyes of an animal that had located prey and was deciding the order of operations. I want to add one more thing about the face, because I have thought about it. The face was my face, but it was not my face the way I would see it in a mirror. It was my face the way another person would see it. There is a small difference. We do not, most of us, know our own face the way other people know our face. We know the mirror version, which is reversed. The face on the man at the gate was not reversed. The mole I have under my left eye was on the right side of his face, the way it actually is, the way I have only seen in photographs. He was not a copy from a mirror. He was a copy from somewhere else, from a photograph, from having been watched. I do not know which. He raised his right hand. He waved at me. Small, friendly. The way I would wave at another district truck if I were on foot at a gate and another district unit came down the road. He spoke. He said, in my voice, "Hey, brother, come check this with me. The wheel is off." I sat in the truck. I did not move. I did not key the radio. The radio was on. I knew Lupe was listening. He said, in my voice, "Come on, just for a minute. The wheel is off. I can't get it." I looked at the wheel of the gate. The wheel was on. The wheel was as it should have been. There was no mechanical problem with the gate. The wheel was not off. I keyed the radio. Padilla. Status. 12 out. Lupe. The man knows my voice. He's using it. He's asking me to come check the wheel. The wheel is fine. Stay in the truck. I put the truck in reverse. I backed up. I did it slowly. I kept the high beams on the man at the gate. I watched him through the windshield as I backed the truck up the access road. He did not move at first. He stood at the gate and he watched me back up. When I was about 30 feet back, he started walking toward the truck. He walked the way a person walks. I want to put that on the record. The legs moved, the arms swung, the hips moved, the head was level. He covered ground at a normal walking pace. He looked from 100 feet away through the high beams and the fog, like a man walking up an access road toward a stopped vehicle. The thing wrong with the walk was the ground. He was not stepping on the ground. I do not know how to say this in a way that makes it sound less like a thing somebody made up. He was walking, and his legs were moving, and his feet were going down and coming up, and the dust on the road was not moving where his feet went down. The truck tires, when I had driven down, had thrown up small puffs of dust in the high beams. His feet did not throw up dust. They contacted the ground without contacting the ground. He walked toward the truck, and the road was not his road. I backed up faster. The access road is curved. I had to back through the curve. I did it on instinct. I had backed that road in daylight, and in the dark, and in rain, and in the early snow, and I did it now without looking at the mirrors. I kept my eyes on the man. He kept walking. He did not gain on the truck. He did not lose ground either. He kept the same distance, about 30 feet, the entire time I was backing up. I came up to the county road. I keyed the radio. Padilla. I'm out on the county road. I'm heading north to the gas station at the frontage road. Copy. I'm meeting you there. 5 out. Lupe. I'm out. Copy. Stay on channel 3. I drove north. I did not look in the mirrors. I held the wheel at 10 and 2. I kept the speed at 50 miles an hour. I did not turn my head. I want to describe the drive north because it is the only part of the morning I have a hard time talking about. The county road through the bosque runs about 4 miles up to the frontage road that parallels the interstate. The frontage road has a Phillips 66 station on it that runs 24 hours, and that has a row of canopy lights over the pumps that are some of the only lights in that section of the bosque after dark. I drove the 4 miles at 50 miles an hour without stopping. The fog began to lift about 2 miles in. The eastern sky began to lighten about 1 mile in. I came up out of the bosque onto the frontage road, and I saw the lights of the Phillips 66, and I drove into the lot, and I parked under the brightest of the canopy lights, and I sat there with the engine running and the doors locked. I looked in the rear view. The road behind me was empty. There was no figure. There was no truck. There was nothing. I unkeyed the radio. I sat with my hands on the wheel, and I waited for Padilla. The dawn was coming up. The clerk in the Phillips 66 was an older man I knew by sight, who was sitting behind the counter with a paperback. He looked up at me through the window. He raised his coffee cup. I raised a hand. Deputy Padilla pulled in 8 minutes later. He was a man in his 30s, in a Socorro County uniform, who had been a deputy for 6 years. He pulled up beside my truck and he rolled down his window. He had his hand on his sidearm without making it obvious he had his hand on his sidearm. "You won't write?" "I'm all right. Tell me what you saw." I told him. He wrote it down. He took out a digital recorder and we went over it again. I told him about the coyote. I told him about the truck tracks. I told him about the man at the gate. I told him about the walk. He did not interrupt. When I was done, he sat in his cruiser for a minute looking at the windshield. Then he said, "You're the third ditch rider I've taken a statement from in the bosque section in the last 4 years. The other two saw a figure they couldn't account for. Neither of them said the figure looked like them. You're the first one who said that." "What were the other two?" "They were figures. One in a coat, one in a serape. Always alone. Always in the pre-dawn. Always at a gate. Both reports are filed. Neither of them ever cleared up to anything. The Conservancy District knows about both reports. So does my office." "What do you do with them?" "I write them up. They go in the file. I don't have anything else to do with them. We don't have a category for what you're describing. The category is unknown trespasser with no impact event, and that's where it goes." He looked at me. "I don't have to tell you. You know what people in the valley call this thing?" "I know what they call it. My grandmother grew up in Lematar. She had a name for it that wasn't the Navajo name. I will not say either name out loud at 4:30 in the morning at a Phillips 66. You go home. Take a few days. Let the Conservancy District know what happened. They'll figure out the rotation." He paused. He looked at me for a long moment. "One more thing. The figure that wore your face, did it follow you to the county road?" "Yes. About 30 feet back. The whole way up the access road." "Did it cross the county road?" I had to think. I had been backing up. I had not turned around in the truck until I had reached the county road, and at that point I'd put the truck in drive and gone north. I had not looked in the mirrors after I'd gotten on the county road. I had not, until that moment, thought about whether the figure had crossed the county road or had stopped at the bar ditch. I said, "I don't know. I didn't look." Padilla nodded. He said, "If you want to know whether it crossed, I can run you back down there at sunrise and we can check the dust on the shoulder. I'd guess it didn't cross. I'd guess it stopped at the bar ditch, where the access road meets the pavement. The old people in this valley believe these things stop at certain kinds of edges. The bar ditch is one. The pavement is another. Lit ground is the strongest of the three. You drove to lit ground. You did the right thing. You want to go look?" "No. I will write it up the way you described it. I will put subject did not pursue beyond access road bar ditch in the report. That is what I am going to write. The report will sit in the file with the others. You go home." I went home. I told my wife. She listened. She had heard versions of the story from her own father, who had run cattle on a small place near Polvadera in the 70s. She knew what to do. She drew a fresh basin of water, and she washed my face and my hands at the kitchen sink. She did not ask me anything else. She put me to bed. The Conservancy District Incident Report number is MRGCD-IR-23-114. The Socorro County Sheriff case number is SCSO-23-00702. The disposition on the county case is unidentified individual in conservancy attire, possible impersonation, no injury, no property damage, no suspect identified, suspended. The disposition on the district report is unscheduled gate access by non-district personnel, gate 274. Pre-dawn rotation discontinued for solo operation through end of season. The district moved every solo pre-dawn rotation in the bosque section to a two-person rotation effective the following Monday. The two-person rotation has held since I went back to gate 274 8 days later in daylight with a coworker named Esteban Aragon, who'd been with the district for 22 years. The apron was clean. The wheel was as it should have been. The dust on the access road had been disturbed, probably by Padilla and the deputies who had cleared the gate after I had left, but if there had been a track that did not match a vehicle, it had been driven over since. There was nothing to see at the gate. Esteban looked at me at the gate. He did not say much. We opened the wheel together. The flow came up. We drove out. That afternoon, on the drive back to the yard, Esteban told me that his uncle, who had ridden the bosque section as a ditch rider in the late 1970s, had quit the work after a pre-dawn rotation and had taken a job at a feed store in Socorro and had stayed at the feed store until he retired. The uncle had never said why. Esteban had not asked. If you find yourself standing where you haven't gone yet, do not walk toward the man doing your job. Get to your truck, lock the doors, drive to lights you trust. Don't look at his face long enough to memorize it, because the face is a borrowed face, and what borrows a face borrows other things, and a long look is the door it walks through. The wheel is fine. The wheel is always fine. Don't go check.